I'll tell how the good old Union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
That's right, folks. From the mountains of Kentucky to the bayous of Louisiana, broadcasting online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studios in Huntsville, Alabama, this is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. Today, Tesla and Elon Musk continue to have problems in Sweden. We're going to get an update on the libraries in Alabama from Marissa with the North Alabama DSA, and talk about how Starbucks could owe tens of millions of dollars in back pay to union workers. All that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, we've got a phone number and the line is open. You can give us a call at 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave us a voicemail throughout the week and we might respond to it on the next program. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, you can find us anywhere you find anything online, in particular at our website, tvlr.fm, but we are also on YouTube, Facebook, and wherever you get your podcasts, all at the Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners, so if you want to become a sustaining donor to the program or make a one-time donation, you can go to tvlr.fm/donate or patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. And we've got a bunch of cool merch for sale at tvlr.fm/store. We have our logo dad caps, some of our Join a Union tees left, and pre-orders are open for our union-made matchbooks and a new t-shirt that says Unionize, but it looks like the Supreme logo. Very cool stuff. And finally, if you're a member of a union, then please do think about getting your local to sponsor the show. You can reach out to us for more details on that.
And let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, Unclaimed Mysteries Internet Radio, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, WMMT, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check that out. As most of you know, we are not media professionals, just a few diehard unionists who believe that Alabama and the South's labor movement and working class deserve a bigger platform. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we can't do it without you. We want to thank everyone for tuning in, whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener. We appreciate you spending some time with us.
And with that, let's go ahead and jump right into last week in Southern labor. Here is what workers in the U.S. South and the American colonies were up to from October 4th to the 11th in new union campaigns. 21 workers at Aimbridge Hospitality in Washington, D.C. filed a petition to hold a union election with Unite Here, Local 25. 7 workers at Lush Cosmetics in St. Louis, Missouri filed a petition to hold a union election with the United Food and Commercial Workers, UFCW, Local 655. 24 workers at ProTech Fire Services in San Antonio, Texas filed a petition to hold a union election with the Kelly Airfield Professional Firefighters, Local I-107. 175 workers at Siemens in Fort Worth, Texas filed a petition to hold a union election with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW, Local 220. 67 workers at Environmental Air Systems in High Point, North Carolina, filed a petition to hold a union election with the United Association of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters, UA Local 421, as did 38 workers at another location in the same city. 950 workers, doctoral and master's students at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., filed a petition to hold a union election with the Service Employees International Union, SEIU Local 500. 13 workers at Starbucks in Norman, Oklahoma, filed a petition to hold a union election with Starbucks Workers United. Drivers with Z-Trip, which is the Kansas City IRIS microtransit program, launched a campaign for living wages and the right to form a union without retaliation. They held a rally on Thursday at which Bill George, the CEO of Z-Trip, and Terry O'Toole, the company's general manager, came to the rally to yell at participants. He called the demonstration a, quote, charade. The Florida Federation of Police is attempting to raid the Florida Police Benevolent Association, PBA, at the city of Bartow in Florida. In election results, 7 workers at Skookum,
Washington, DC?
Seven workers at Skookum in Washington, D.C. filed a petition to hold a union election with the International Union of Operating Engineers, IUOE Local 99, but withdrew the petition in the same week. 60 workers at Merson USA GSTN Corporation in Columbia, Tennessee voted 39-13 in favor of unionization with the Communication Workers of America. 12 workers at Science Applications International Corporation, SAIC, in Dallas, Texas, voted 7-0 in favor of unionization with the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, IAMAW. 10 workers at Big Sandy Rural Electric Cooperative Corporation in Paintsville, Kentucky voted 2-6 against unionization with IBEW Local 317. 7 workers at Pye Barker Fire and Safety in Bowling Green, Kentucky voted 4-3 in favor of unionization with the UA's Road Sprinkler Fitters Local 669. 7 workers at Wells Fargo in Anniston, Alabama voted in favor of unionization with Wells Fargo Workers United, CWA. 889 workers at Seminole County Public Schools in Stanford, Florida voted 75-0 in favor of recertifying the Seminole Educational Clerical Association as their union. 554 workers at Citrus County Public Schools in Inverness, Florida voted 109-14 in favor of recertifying the Citrus County Education Association as their union. 302 workers at Hardy County Public Schools in Wauchula, Florida voted 125-7 in favor of recertifying the Hardy Education Association as their union. 253 workers at Gadsden County Public Schools in Quincy, Florida voted 102-1 in favor of recertifying the Gadsden Education Staff Professional Association as their union. 132 workers at the School Board of Duval County in Jacksonville, Florida voted 33-1 in favor of recertifying the Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA, Local 630 as their union. 293 solid waste and public works workers at the city of Jacksonville in Jacksonville, Florida voted 136-5 in favor of recertifying the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME, Local 1279 as their union. 1,771 other blue and white-collar workers at the city of Jacksonville in Jacksonville, Florida, voted 225-53 in favor of reunionizing with AFSCME, Local 1279, after their union was previously decertified. And 627 workers at Polk County Public Schools in Bartow, Florida, voted 145-7 in favor of recertifying AFSCME as their union. In strikes and bargaining updates, CWA Local 3645, which represents passenger service workers at the Charlotte Douglas International Airport, is pushing for more buses for its members for before and after work. On Tuesday, October the 8th, Richmond public sector workers represented by the Teamsters Local 322 will rally at City Hall to demand that Mayor LeVar Stoney and his administration get serious and offer these essential workers a fair agreement. Stellantis just spent another $1.1 billion on stock buybacks as they claim that, quote, market conditions prohibit them from making the investments that they promised in their contract with the UAW. And more UAW locals are authorizing strike action in response. Nurses unionized with the National Nurses United, NNU, at Del Sol and Las Palmas medical centers in El Paso, Texas, voted to ratify new 3-year agreements with wage increases up to 25% and improved language on staffing. NNU nurses at the VA in Martinsburg, West Virginia, held an informational picket to highlight the administration's refusal to bargain with nurses over improving patient care. NNU nurses at Mission Hospital in Asheville, North Carolina, voted to ratify a new 3-year agreement with up to 29% raises and improved staffing language. In political and legislative updates, members of UE Local 150 from Raleigh and Durham, North Carolina, visited the Cuban embassy last week to learn more about their hurricane preparedness in the country. And the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE, is applauding a new proposed regulation to align locality adjustments for different types of federal workers. That is it for Last Week in Southern Labor. If we missed anything, let us know at tvlr.fm/contact. We're going to take a break really quick, and we will be right back to talk to Marissa from the North Alabama DSA about libraries in Alabama. Stay tuned. Benefit Architects has proudly supported union members and union-made products for over 35 years. If you are a federal employee and an AFGE member, you're eligible for hundreds of dollars in money-saving benefits, including group life insurance, dental insurance, and AFLAC insurance. Additionally, if you're a union member but don't work for the federal government, you can still qualify for several of these money-saving policies. So give Tate Hure a call at 256-215-6769 for details and to enroll. Again, that is Tate Hure at 256-215-6769.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and family members are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough even to keep their jobs. We can fix this. It's time for us to find a way to close the health care coverage gap so that people can remain at work. Let's make this a priority. Let's close this gap and cover Alabama. To learn more and how you can help, visit coveralabama.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at IAMAW44.org.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, you can give us a call. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We've got over 30 people watching us on YouTube and only 11 likes. What's up with that? That's crazy. Like the stream if you haven't yet. Subscribe to the channel. All of that good stuff. Appreciate everybody tuning in and hanging out with us in the chat. Reese, hi. We are Ronan. Hey, y'all. Solidarity forever. P.A. Leggett sends a heart. Barbara says good morning, y'all. Thank you very much for tuning in and participating. We always appreciate everybody that participates in the chat. Again, that phone number is 844-899-TVLR if you would like to give us a call, ask us a question, talk to us about something that's been going on in your union. We'd love to hear about it, especially if you are in the South or if you just have a question about unions. Feel free to give us a call. We have Marissa on the line, going to be talking to us about libraries in Alabama, but we have a really quick international story for you. Union postal workers in Sweden don't have to deliver mail to Tesla, as workers in Sweden have the right to engage in strikes and secondary strikes, according to a Swedish court. The issue began last year when Tesla refused to recognize their mechanics' desire to unionize with IF Metal, which is a large union in Sweden. After Tesla refused to recognize the union, the mechanics went on strike. Following that, several other Nordic unions took action against the company. Dock workers in other Nordic countries refused to load Teslas bound for Sweden. Garbage workers in Sweden refused to collect trash from the company, and postal workers at the time refused to deliver mail to the company, particularly registrations for the vehicles. And that was the subject of the court case. Tesla was attempting to force the union postal workers to deliver mail to them, and the Swedish court said no, that workers in Sweden have a right to engage in strike action. So that's a very good ruling from the Swedish court. It can still be appealed, but that's where things stand right now. Tesla has 3 weeks to appeal the decision. In addition to that, 40 members at the city of Gothenburg's power company have announced that they will stop servicing Tesla charging ports unless the conflict is resolved by October 10th. That date has come and gone, so presumably the power company in the city of Gothenburg has stopped servicing Tesla charging ports. It's unclear if unions at other power companies across the country are going to take similar action, but again, this is a big escalation. Unfortunately, Tesla has found ways around these disruptions in Sweden. They are, instead of shipping Teslas and new cars by sea, they are transporting the cars by rail and truck. They are also handling garbage themselves now and are having their customers pick up their own registrations that would typically be mailed to the company and delivered and given to the customers when they buy their new cars. Tesla's market share has also stayed approximately the same over the course of the strike, actually increasing by 1%, which doesn't seem like a good sign for the union. But the unions do maintain that they are affecting Tesla's operations, which is pretty obvious. I mean, if it was cheaper to ship cars by rail and truck, then presumably Tesla would have done that originally instead of shipping them by sea. So we'll continue to follow the strike by mechanics at Tesla and the strike against Tesla by other union workers in Sweden and the Nordic countries more broadly. But that is the latest. The latest is that the Swedish courts have said, no, we will not force postal workers to deliver mail to you while there is an ongoing labor dispute. It is a worker's right in Sweden to engage in collective action, and that is the stance of the Swedish court. So really exciting ruling there.
Yeah, very nice compared to what we're typically used to here in the United States, particularly here in the South. So shout out to Swedish courts for recognizing workers have those rights.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to take it away here. I'm really excited about this next conversation. Dr. Marissa Allison is a public sociologist and solidarity economist. She is a community organizer here in Huntsville, Alabama with At the Root Collective, and she is chair of the Labor Committee with the North Alabama DSA, Democratic Socialist of America. Marissa, thanks so much for being back on the Valley Labor Report.
Always good to be here. Good to see you guys. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. So you're involved in a lot of things, but one arena you've been following pretty closely is all the drama and struggle around public libraries in the state. For me, I've tried to follow it, but I know there's been some changes to the Alabama Administrative Code. There's a controversial new chair of the State Library Board. And of course, all of this is happening in a context where well-funded extremist cranks and bigots are trying to ban books and criminalize librarians and, manufacture controversy. So here's a big question for you, Marissa. What's going on in Alabama's libraries?
Yeah, I think no one should feel ashamed if they don't know everything that is happening. It feels like something new is coming up every day. So last year, Governor Ivey put forward to the Alabama Public Library Service Board a set of changes that she wanted them to make to the administrative code. And that is the code that libraries have to follow in order to receive state funding. So she, pushed forward those changes, and even with a large public outcry against them, they still were pushed through. And so those changes are now being enacted in libraries across Alabama. New policies are being developed in order to comply with those changes. Folks are doing things differently in different library spaces, but some of the biggest changes are coming for our youngest readers. Everyone under the age of 18 is going to have to shift the way in which they have access to the library and the materials within. So here in Huntsville, where I am, our library board has created a 3-tiered system for patrons under 18 that parents will have to select to allow their kids to have access to what they had access to before. That hasn't gone into place just yet, but what that means is that for some folks under the age of 18, if their parents don't go in and specifically say that they can move up to a higher level, that they would only have access to the books that are really for our youngest readers, board books, picture books in the library. And we should say, the library board has been working as hard as they can to try to not allow this stuff to happen. And we're really hoping that something would change, but that hasn't happened so far. And so libraries across the state are enacting different policies. I can talk about some of the other ones that are a little bit more surprising, but everyone should really be paying attention to what's happening in their local library and how the policies are changing, and what that means for them.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about, practically what some of these changes look like and some of the, more concerning things that you've heard across the state, as, like you said, all local library systems are going to have to make some changes to adopt this new administrative code pushed through by the governor against the, wishes of the public. So what are some more of these, local policy changes that are coming up across the state?
Yeah, so in one of the administrative code changes that came through, there was a push to say that materials that are obscene, sexually explicit, or otherwise inappropriate for minors, which is a hard thing to define, that library boards would have to not purchase books that fall into those categories, which I should say they didn't already. That wasn't something that was happening. At the state level, what is happening is that they're trying to push through legislation last year and then again this year that would redefine the definitions of sexually explicit. We don't have obscene material in our libraries, but they're trying to redefine that. So what that looks like is like in the North Shelby Library, the board voted on new policies just this last week that will segregate all LGBTQ children's books, putting them in a section that will require parental supervision. In Coleman County, they have now moved everything from the young adult section to the adult fiction section. So they're reclassifying over 2,000 books, which means that was the easier process for them. Other libraries, Ozark Dell had to close down for an entire month at the end of the summer to go through their materials and make sure that they complied with these. Most libraries, if they are interpreting these changes the way that they should be, that means that they're recognizing and saying there are state code definitions that we can follow that are talking about obscenity, sexual explicit. These have like specific legal definitions, and if they are following them, and that's what Huntsville's doing, Jefferson County is doing the same thing, then that means that right now things are safe. But if the pre-filed legislation, HB4, that would change these definitions will also put librarians at risk of jail time for having materials on the shelves available to children under 18 or kids under 18. So it's a big concern for labor. It's a big concern for people who use the library, which oftentimes those are people that necessarily don't have the ability to just go out and buy a book. And we use the library all the time in my house. We use them for my kid. We want him to have access to books that show the family that he's growing up in. And if we were in North Shelby right now, those books would be segregated to a different section.
Wow. Yeah, it's so bizarre to me that you have this push from certain corners of the state, certain populations, and it seems as if they are conflating pornography and what most folks would consider obscene or explicit materials. They're conflating that with material that just mentions gay people, LGBT folks, diversity. I've seen more racially charged attacks on certain books. So it's just very concerning, to really mislead folks in the public and mislead people to think that, little Johnny and little Jane are getting access to things at the library that they really shouldn't. It's very, very it's gross. It's gross to weaponize that kind of stuff. And as you said, we've got real impacts, right? You've got a library that had to shut down for a whole month. That whole community was without a critical community asset, because I totally agree with you. It's not just checking out books. It is a hub for the community. It's a resource for the community, particularly poor and working class folks. It's a place where you can get internet access and, work on your resume and apply for jobs, find resources to do that kind of thing. So it's really an attack on the public as a whole, and it's really gross. And one of the ringleaders of that is John Wall. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about this character.
Yeah, so John Wall was initially brought on the Alabama Public Library Service Board from the North Alabama region. He's now been selected to become the chair of the APLS just at the end of September. He's also the chair of the Alabama Republican Party. The interesting thing about what happened at this last APLS board meeting is that the state, when they sent money down to the APLS that then gets filtered to the libraries, there was a decline in funding. And what that meant, and what the APLS has decided to do, is to not fund hotspots anymore, where people could actually go and check them out from their libraries and then take them home. And in that meeting, John Wall had to have hotspots explained to him. So there was also not a real understanding of what the impact was going to be. This is, for me, as a public sociologist, this is my biggest concern, is that we're moving in a direction where we're defunding these very vital and important public institutions. And the recognition that this is going to have impacts. The Huntsville-Madison County Library has already ceased their hotspot program. It's going to have a rippling effect, and those folks who, are in the working class are going to be the most affected for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for me, like, the state of Alabama is not doing great when it comes to internet access. Like, it's just, that's a problem that we have across the state. There are too many folks who lack high-speed internet as it is. And, to see this vital resource, these hotspots, Wi-Fi hotspots that libraries are being offered, to see that funding cut is really a blow. So I'm curious, like, how have community members responded to all of this? Like, what are you hearing from folks? What are you seeing in terms of response and what people are doing, in light of these attacks on our library system?
Yeah, I mean, over the past year, we've just seen just a rise of community pushback against this and resistance to all of these policies, the changes, things that are happening in local libraries. And that does seem to be keeping up pace. We still have library board meetings. Last week, the Athens Limestone board meeting, the chair said, I've been chairing this for, I think, like 15 years or something. And he was like, oh, we never had people show up at these meetings, and now they're completely packed. So people know that things are going on, and there is a big pushback, from multiple different organizations. So folks have probably heard in their own communities about different organizations like Read Freely Alabama. We have the North Alabama chapter of the Democratic Socialists. We have a pushback that's been going on for the past year. Birmingham as well, their chapter of the Democratic Socialists as well have been heavily involved. And then up here in Huntsville, we have the At the Root Collective, which has been really showing up, and we've been buried in library stuff and still hear community members saying, like, I didn't realize what the impact of this would be. Because, I mean, let's be clear, what's happening is a false sort of moral panic that people are afraid that things that actually aren't in the library are in the library, or there's misrepresentations of books, say about comprehensive sex education, that are in young adult sections, which are appropriate for that age, are being said to be in a section where a 2-year-old can just, reach up and grab them. And that's just not the case. What that has done for our library workers is put them at an increased risk. Threats coming in by community members who believe that they are doing things. Some of the worst charges that are leveled both at us, who are really just trying to make sure that libraries are, accessible for everyone, that we don't have censorship coming into our libraries, is that we're trying to groom children, and just perverting these notions of things that are really problematic and unfounded at best.
Yeah, it's really disturbing to see the amount of misinformation that's pumped out. And, we see that time and time again down here, whether it's about immigrants, whether it's about other, minorities and marginalized communities in our community. We see this kind of misinformation that is spread, and a lot of the folks who are doing it may not know exactly what they're doing by trafficking in these false narratives and spreading misinformation, but we know that some of the folks do, right? And as you mentioned, John Wall, he is chair of the Alabama Republican Party. Some folks may recall he had issues some years ago where he allegedly voted with a homemade ID. So not only does he not understand hotspots, I'm not sure he fully understands driver's licenses and voter registration. But that's a segment for another day. Marissa, so I'm curious about this Reading Revolution campaign that you've been involved in, that's sort of connected to all this struggle that's happening around the libraries. Tell us a little bit more about Reading Revolution.
Yeah, so this is a joint project between Birmingham's DSA and North Alabama's DSA. We've been working together for a year now, trying to collectively push back against things that are happening in libraries. What we're really encouraging folks to do is get out to their libraries, make sure you have a library card. We have a list of books, a link tree. I can give your listeners the address is a linktree.com /reading revolution. And I can give it to you all for your show notes as well. And if they go there, they can find a list of 100 books. We have a section on labor, some Alabama labor history books, just kind of all the most important topics right now. The banned books that we're seeing across the U.S. Are on there, and we're just trying to get folks to get out and check out those books. Post on social media and tag us if you do and if you want to, and really just get the circulation up, because one of the biggest arguments that we have heard from the people who are pushing for censorship in our libraries is that they they aren't trying to ban books, but in fact their reasoning isn't sound. When you move books out of the sections that they're supposed to be in, then they don't get checked out as much. And if they don't get checked out as much, then the circulation goes down and those books are removed, which ostensibly is a book ban. And that's what they want to see. So if we get out, check out the books that they don't want in the hands of the people who should have them, then those books are going to remain on the bookshelves. So you can go to that website and check out the books that we have on there. We have a contact form. If you can't find them, we can help you figure out how to go into your library and either donate a book that you don't see there or request a purchase of it.
Yeah, I really love this idea, and I'm just kind of checking out the book list, and there are books there that are commonly challenged, throughout the history of our schools and our libraries. Some of these books are considered kind of controversial. For example, Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. That's one that's been targeted from state to state over many years. But lots of really interesting, recommendations on the list. And I got to give a shout out to The Hammer by Hamilton Nolan. That's a newer book that came out this year.
It's already on the frequently targeted list for...
no, this is just a recommended reading list,
okay.
for Reading Revolution. I don't think it's been targeted yet that we know of, but if they knew how damn good it was, they might, because it is a great one. So yeah, I really, really love that idea of getting folks, engaged with their libraries. Go get your library card, check out some books, learn more about organizing and about the history of labor in Alabama. And you and I are actually doing some collaboration on that note, trying to educate folks on labor history, particularly here in the South. So you want to tell folks what we're up to on that?
Yeah, so we're going to have Adam out to the Huntsville-Madison County, the North Huntsville Library on the 22nd at, what time is it?
6 p.m.?
6 p.m. Yeah, sorry. And he's going to be giving us a history of labor. And we're really excited. I know your listeners already know that you are a former educator. So I think there's a lot to be learned, and we're supporting the library by holding this event there. And we hope to have a lot more events like this as well.
Yeah, I am always down to do educational events in the community, just so folks know. So yeah, it's an introduction to U.S. labor history, kind of a broad outline of, the spectrum of activity we've had as a labor movement from its early days throughout the Industrial Revolution all the way into, our contemporary era. It's hard to squeeze in an entire history of a country's labor movement in 1 hour, but we'll do our damnedest to do it. And I think it'll be a really good time. I think it's going to be a great opportunity to, for folks to learn a little bit more, maybe some things they didn't know about our state and, our state's place in this movement. So again, that is the 22nd, October 22nd. It's a Tuesday night, 6 o'clock at the North Huntsville Library. Really appreciate the DSA Labor Committee for organizing this event and inviting me out. And if you're listening to this and you're interested and you can't make it, no worries. I am already talking to some folks about how we can do this as a virtual event moving forward and put it online as a webinar. And I'm happy to come to you. Right, reach out to us, tvlr.fm. Happy to work with you and come out to your neck of the woods to do this workshop with folks. We'll have some participation, we'll have some discussion, we'll have some presentation, and some space just to really talk about what workers have done and continue to do to fight for a better life and a better community. So I wanted to just thank you for all your work, Marissa, around the public libraries. And if you are listening to this and you are upset that there are crazy folks out there trying to ban books and attack our libraries and defund vital programs for the public, I encourage you to get organized. As Marissa said, there are groups out here, grassroots folks and organizations throughout the state, including here locally in North Alabama, if you're in our listening area. There are plenty of folks you can get connected with, and I would encourage you to talk to library workers. My instinct as a unionist is that one of the best pathways for library workers to defend themselves is to come together, organize, and build unions. Many librarians are unionized throughout the country, and I think it's really going to be an important step that library workers need to take here in the state of Alabama. So for any library workers, if you haven't talked to your coworkers yet, you should start doing that. You should start reaching out to labor folks. Reach out to any of us at the Valley Labor Report, but the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. There are so many resources out there, but definitely do reach out. So, Marissa, did you have any final words before we let you go?
That was actually the final word that I was going to say as well, is you can reach out to us at DSA. If any of you are library workers out there, I really just want to ditto what Adam said. I think that there are things that we can do when we come together as workers and push back. And now's the time to do it. I mean, this pre-filed legislation is pretty scary. And as always, I think it's important in the South to remind folks that it's important to stay and make change. Before you leave, let's try to make change here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Marissa Allison. Really appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you all.
All right, folks, that is it for our conversation with Dr. Marissa Allison. We still have a little bit of the show left to go. We're going to be talking about Starbucks potentially owing union baristas over $30 million. That's what the NLRB is arguing now. So really excited to talk to y'all about that. We're going to talk about Boss Watch, and we might have time for some other stuff. We will have time for calls if you'd like to call in. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857 if you want to give us a call. We're going to take a break really quick, and we will be right back to talk about Starbucks, bad bosses, and more.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and neighbors are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough to keep their jobs. We need to fix this. Let's close the health care coverage gap. To learn more, visit coveralabama.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Ironworkers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Ironworkers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
The Laborers International Union of North America, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact Donna at their training center to start the process. That phone number is 256-415-7452. Again, that phone number is 256-415-7452. No experience is needed. Free training is offered, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is their mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
I'm Attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Since 1889, the National Association of Letter Carriers has protected the rights of city carriers as they deliver the mail and offer support for their community. The Alabama State Association of Letter Carriers makes their legislative voices heard when it comes to issues involving the U.S. Postal Service and the working members of the union. The National Association of Letter Carriers has been longtime supporters of the Muscular Dystrophy Association and the Stamp Out Hunger Food Drive. This message is sponsored by the Alabama Association of Letter Carriers. To learn more, visit nalc.org.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, you can give us a call. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. I'm really excited for the second half of the show today. We're going to be talking to Immanuel, Ness, and Stuart Eimer about labor councils. Did I bring the book with me? I meant to, but I don't think that I did. No, I did. They wrote a book 20 years ago called Central Labor Councils and the Revival of American Unionism. And we're going to be talking to them about that. It was written at an interesting time in the labor movement, for folks who are students of history, students of labor history in particular. You will know that the 90s and early 2000s was a period of kind of a high tide for union reform efforts. Ron Carey won the presidency of the Teamsters. New Voices won leadership at the AFL-CIO. And ultimately, those reform efforts and rejuvenation efforts kind of fizzled out. They argued that central labor councils were a big part of that, and so I'm interested in talking to them about the book, about some of the things that they, basically the book is like a collection of case studies of labor councils from across the country. So it's really interesting, and it's cool reading about what labor councils were doing 20 years ago, and so, interested in talking to them about that, talking to them about how they see the evolution of labor councils and the labor movement since the early 2000s and the late 90s, and I'm really excited for that conversation. So make sure that you stay tuned for the second half of the program.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. I mean, obviously, you and I are both big believers in the power of central labor councils. Those are the regional federations of your local labor unions. They are. Would you say they're pretty autonomous, like relatively autonomous? There are certain limits to, like taking positions on national or international issues, but, more or less operate as autonomous bodies at the regional level. And I think there's so much potential there because, it's the same concept of our unions, right? That you're stronger together. The more you come together and collaborate and work together, the stronger you will be, the more you can accomplish. And so I believe when the local labor unions do come together and collaborate and organize together in these labor councils, there's a ton of potential to build power for working people. It's what we're trying to do here in North Alabama. If you are a union member in the North Alabama area, hit us up. We would love to get you involved. And I'll mention here in a moment when our next meeting is. But I think labor councils are really critical institutions. So wherever you're listening from, we have listeners all over the country, all over the world, even.
Yep.
We appreciate you.
And labor councils are not just in America. I mean, you mentioned all over the world, and like the formation, the formation is such a logical, evolution of the driving logic of unionism, which is that we are stronger together, that these types of formation, labor councils, exist literally everywhere in the world. We had a guest who was president of a labor council type formation from Bolivia. Right? They have these kinds of things everywhere because it just makes sense. We believe in unionism. We believe that we are more powerful together. So obviously, if we're more powerful together in our individual workplaces, then we should come together, the unions from different workplaces, and talk about how we can make our communities better. And that's what labor councils do. They're everywhere. And your union should be involved in it, and you should be a part of your union's involvement in it. So we're really excited to have that conversation. Appreciate everybody hanging out with us on the YouTube. We now have over 40 people watching us and only 28 likes. So we got to get those likes up. If you haven't liked the show, then go ahead, like the stream, go ahead and do that. And if you're listening to us on a podcast, give us a 5-star rating, all of that good stuff. In the chat, Omnichrome says, I'm in my 50s. When I was growing up, there was no young adult section, and I graduated from the children's books at 13 or so. We Are Ronan says, outstanding interview. Piece of Clayton DDD says, hi, folks. Just got here. Lots of folks today. Quirky Geek Girl says, good morning and happy Thanksgiving from Canada. It's Thanksgiving in Canada, apparently. So there you go. She says, I'm the Canadian fan, and yes, my friends think I'm weird for watching a labor podcast from Alabama, but the guys get great guests. Thank you. I think we do too. Our guests are pretty cool.
I really agree. I'm pretty biased, but it's not me and Jacob. It's really the team effort, and it's the dynamic guests that we manage to pull in every week, like really cool and smart and interesting people who are doing good work, here in Alabama, but all over the world.
Yep, absolutely.
And on that note, let me plug some local events. I want to talk about some things that are happening here in the area, especially for our North Alabama folks here in the Tennessee Valley, but across the state. The first one I always want to mention is with Labor Notes, and they do offer online workshops and trainings that are available to you no matter where you're listening from. Go to labornotes.org/events for these trainings. I am a big believer in what they offer. I credit Labor Notes a lot with my organizing over the years. I have learned so much from the resources they provide, the journalism that they do, and the training that they offer. So they have a stewards workshop coming up on October 23rd. Make the most of wine garden rights. That one should be really good. They've also got a free online event later in the month on the October 29th, Lend and Rule webinar. Join the Coalition Against Campus Debt as they share insights to questions from their book, Lend and Rule, Fighting the Shadow Financialization of Public Higher Education. So that should be a good one as well. Speaking of Labor Notes, Alabama Troublemaker School is Saturday the 19th. That is a week from today if you're listening live. So Saturday, October 19th, you do not want to miss this. It's going to be in Birmingham at, I believe it's the First Church there in Birmingham. You can go to labornotes.org/events. You can find it on there. It is very affordable. If you're struggling to afford what they're charging, I'm sure you can reach out to them, but it's a very affordable training. Lunch is provided, and there are going to be some great workshops, some great panels. Really, really excited about this. It's always, the learning and the education is great, but also just gathering people together, movement-minded folks, people who want to build people power here in the South. When you gather folks like that in the same space, it's really, impactful. So really excited about that. You don't want to miss it. Alabama Troublemaker School on Saturday, October 19th. If you're listening and you can drive there, I expect to see you there. Tell us hello. Also next week on Thursday, October 17th, the Southern Workers Assembly is hosting a virtual discussion called Building Rank and File Power to Fight Fascism. It's going to be at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. You can go to southernworker.org to find out more and register. On Monday, October 21st, the North Alabama Area Labor Council will hold its regular business meeting at 6 p.m. at the Plumbers and Pipefitters Hall in Madison. That's on Highway 20, Madison Boulevard. Any union member in the area is welcome, even if your local is not affiliated or not affiliated yet with our Labor Council. You can follow the North Alabama Area Labor Council on Facebook. We do have an active Facebook page. Be sure to opt into our Action Network communications to stay up to date, and we'll be posting more about that in the coming days. As we mentioned earlier with the interview with Marissa, on Tuesday, October 22nd, North Alabama DSA's Labor Committee has invited me to do my Intro to U.S. Labor History workshop at the North Huntsville Public Library. It's going to be at 6 p.m. on October 22nd, open to the public, so hope to see a good crowd there. Up next, Alabama Arise, a statewide nonprofit coalition fighting for better policies for poor and working folks, will be hosting a series of meetings virtually and in person across the state over the next few months leading into Alabama's legislative session. Be sure to follow alarise.org and join as a member if you haven't already so you can stay in the loop. Speaking of Alabama Arise, I was just on America's Workforce Radio sharing more updates about their work. And Jacob was also on America's Workforce a couple days earlier talking about the Huntsville City elections and our local labor movement's efforts to build power in the region. Really appreciate the collaboration with America's Workforce Union podcast. They are a long-running daily show out of Ohio. They've been on the radio for like 20, 30 years at this point. I can't remember. I know the host, Flash, Ed Flash Ferentz, has been on the radio for decades. They're also one of the biggest labor podcasts in the country. They have some pretty big guests. AFL-CIO Secretary Treasurer Fred Redmond has a regular spot. Senator Sherrod Brown has a regular spot. Right, usually much bigger guests than me and Jacob. So really appreciate their the opportunity to talk with their audience. And final plug, especially for our local folks, October 21st is the deadline in Alabama for voter registration for next month's general election. So be sure to check the Alabama Secretary of State website. Make sure your voter registration is up to date and you know your polling place, because sometimes they change those on you. So make sure you just Google that, Alabama Secretary of State, or Google, my voter registration, Alabama, and you can find that information. Make sure you are prepared.
All right. Thanks for those updates, Adam. I've got an update about Starbucks. Starbucks workers have been doing a really, really great job of organizing the company. There's now over 11,000 union baristas at over 500 stores. And just last week, the National Labor Relations Board have said that Starbucks has cut workers' hours at hundreds of unionized stores without bargaining over it, and now Starbucks is going to have to pay the difference to those union baristas. That's what the NLRB said last week. The General Counsel of the National Labor Relations Board made this claim in a complaint last week, and it's important to understand that labor law in the United States basically says that once you have unionized, you have a right to have a say in your working conditions. It is no longer the case that your employer can just unilaterally change your conditions of employment. They must bargain with you. Now, that doesn't mean that your employer must agree with you. That doesn't even, the employer can bargain with you and ultimately not change their decision and ultimately implement a change in policy over the wishes of the union and over the wishes of the employees. That's possible. You can do that, but you have to at least go through the motions of bargaining. You can't just unilaterally announce a change in the conditions of employment, a change in the way that you're going to do scheduling, a change in the hourly rate of pay, things like that. You have to at least go through the motions of bargaining, and really, especially under a more worker-friendly labor board, you have to do it in good faith, and you have to genuinely kind of deal with any objections or suggestions from the union before you, implement a policy change over the wishes of the union. And so the NLRB, Jennifer Abruzzo, the general counsel for the NLRB, is alleging in a complaint that Starbucks did not do that they did not bargain over the changing conditions. And so they're saying that at approximately 290 Starbucks stores, after they unionized, Starbucks changed the way that people got hours and ultimately cut hours. And so, just for example, it doesn't say this specifically, but let's just say that across these 290 stores, people at those stores got an average of 30 hours a week before, and now they get an average of 20 hours a week, right? And so the NLRB is saying that for the last 2 years at some of these stores, these changes have been implemented. Starbucks is going to have to go back and pay these people back pay based on what they would have been paid if the company had not made these unilateral changes. And that includes back pay. That's going to include, some of these people, there's a threshold at Starbucks for like when you get into getting health care and these other benefits. And so some of the people obviously came under that threshold. They were above the threshold before these changes were implemented, and they got under it after the changes were implemented. And so they're going to have to pay back pay for the value of the benefits that these people didn't get, and the way that the NLRB has also taken a more expansive definition of making people whole, the make whole remedy, to include interest and to include the interest on short-term loans that employees had to take out because they were not making what they would have made but for the violations of the law by the company. And so if you're talking about, hundreds of stores, thousands of employees over the course of, in some cases at some of these stores, 2 years, you can see how very quickly this starts to add up. And Dave Jamieson has a really good piece about it in the Huffington Post. I recommend you go check it out. Starbucks could owe millions to baristas who unionized. So check that out if you haven't, by Dave Jamieson. Really good labor journalist for the Huffington Post. By the calculations of one NLRB official in an email with Dave, he said the NLRB says that his calculations show that the full scope of wages and benefits could be, quote, north of 30 million, and, quote, these are conservative estimates and the potential remedy could be much higher. So this is going to be a very big deal. In the course of comparing 30 million or even north of 30 million to the profits and the annual operating revenue of Starbucks ultimately is not a huge deal, or it's not a huge percentage, but still having that, but it's obviously going to be a very big win for these workers. I mean, talking about 30 million divided by a few thousand workers, that's a lot of money for each person. That's going to make a big difference in their lives. It's going to give them a lot more confidence in their, in the degree to which labor law, is on their side in the United States. And what we could see out of this, and what is probably the most likely outcome, is that the Starbucks union resolves this complaint and doesn't take it further as a result of a contract and some sort of back pay deal. That basically the expectation or my expectation is that the union and the company settle for some undisclosed or potentially disclosed price to back pay, give back pay to some of these workers, and to get a contract. The union has been negotiating with the company for a national framework for a contract at all of the unionized stores. And so this is going to give them increased leverage. The union is now going to be able to go to the table and say, look, we can make this go away if you negotiate with us in good faith and give us a good contract. That's really the benefit to the union and to these baristas at these hundreds of stores, is that it gives them increased leverage. They can say, we can make this complaint go away, give us a deal. And so we'll see what happens there, but obviously a very, very big development and serious increase in leverage to the union and the 11,000 union baristas.
Yeah, and I want to shout out Starbucks Workers United for unionizing their 500th store recently. I think that's a really big deal. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done. There's actually only two who that have unionized here in Alabama. That's Birmingham first, and then Scottsboro. Really proud of Scottsboro. It was young folks who helped lead the charge there, dealt with a lot of opposition from the company. Still dealing with lots of nonsense from the company is my understanding, or at least what I'm, believing. And it's really unfortunate to see this lawless behavior from Starbucks. They, crafted this progressive image over the years. I believe that probably a lot of customers of Starbucks, would not necessarily be happy with union busting. So that's something that I think we have to continue to educate folks about what's happening in this campaign and what, the extent to which Starbucks is willing to go to bust the union, to crush worker power, to fight against their own employees. It's something they've been doing now with multiple CEOs. It looks like they've had some turmoil at the top, but I don't know that they've really significantly changed tack. My understanding is they're still engaged in litigation to try to more or less gut the NLRB. Is that, Jacob? I don't know if you followed that closely, but the lawsuit that Starbucks and I believe Amazon and SpaceX, and there's maybe one or two other companies that are pursuing litigation to try to more or less outlaw the National Labor Relations Board and rule it unconstitutional. So just really egregious behavior by Starbucks. The key there, though, is as workers continue to organize, I think they will see that leverage grow, and I think they will see more wins like this, and they'll be able to rack up more wins like this. I do think it shows also the value of a pretty good National Labor Relations Board. Right. Whatever you want to say about the Biden administration on any number of policies, many of which I disagree with him on, I have to give credit to the NLRB. It has been probably the best labor board in my lifetime in terms of actually standing for workers and protecting workers' rights and actually doing the mission that it's charged with by law, which is to uphold and protect workers. So, just a few observations there, but I'm excited to dive more into the Starbucks campaign. Reached out to Starbucks Workers United. We're working to get some folks on the show to talk about the 500th store and this, celebrate this milestone. I believe next week's episode we'll also be talking with someone who organized their Starbucks store, the first in their state. So yeah, it's going to be fun to learn a little bit more, check in and see where things are at. I think it's really it's been inspiring to see unionization break ground in the service industry where traditionally it has not had a stronghold. So seeing it gain ground there, and also seeing young people, because it has been a lot of young people involved with organizing Starbucks. Like I said, at Scottsboro, I believe the youngest person on the organizing committee was 16 at the time. Many of the workers who are organizing at these Starbucks stores, they are young. They're fresh out of high school. They're either in college or they've left high school. They're in transitional times in their lives. And they're learning how to organize and fight back against overwhelming corporate power. And I think that's really inspirational, and I really hope will lead to more in our movement, right? Because all of these folks who are cutting their teeth organizing against Starbucks, if they decide not to work at Starbucks for the rest of their lives, if they decide to go into different career paths, they will have that organizing experience and background. And so I hope that this will be a campaign that really, causes multiple campaigns in a ripple effect.
Yeah, absolutely. We have some discussion in the chat from Steve and our Canadian listener about how they don't shop at Starbucks anymore. And I know a lot of people have stopped shopping at Starbucks as a result of their relationship with the union. I have always been my stance towards like boycotts is that I always, if it's over a labor issue anyway, I may or may not shop at stores for any number of reasons, but for labor issues specifically, I typically wait for the union to request a boycott. Otherwise, I don't change my consumption behavior as it relates to labor anyway. So Starbucks Workers United have not requested a boycott of Starbucks, at least an ongoing one. I think there was 1 or 2 days where they were like, hey, don't shop at Starbucks on this day or that day or whatever, right? And obviously I don't cross picket lines, so when Starbucks workers have been on strike, I don't get Starbucks from a struck store, obviously. That's kind of obvious, but generally I have not, and so, I don't shop at Starbucks often, but when I'm traveling, I do. And so what I do is I try to look for a union store, and if there is a union store, then I'll go to Starbucks. But yeah,
talk to your local barista and tell them to go to sbworkersunited.org.
There you go.
And I recommend all of our listeners do that as well, sbworkersunited.org. That is the official website of Starbucks Workers United. You can find out what they're up to. You can see the latest campaigns. And if there are any calls to action, I know they've recently had some events where community members were out distributing flyers at certain targeted stores. If you know anyone who works at a Starbucks, please do connect them to the union. If you are interested in making a difference in the world, get a job at Starbucks and organize that store, because that really is a big deal. So if you're someone who is interested in getting involved with labor, Starbucks is a prime target. Let's just be honest about it. It's an area where there's momentum. So if you're listening to this and you think, wow, I'd really like to organize my workplace, I'd like to try out this union thing and see what it feels like to have this kind of collective power and the power of collective action, Starbucks, do it. Let's do this thing.
There's another person in the chat who also boycotts Starbucks. Alana says, I won't even buy from Starbucks anymore. Go woke, go broke. And now originally I thought that this was like a joke, like they were doing a bit. But I went on their channel and it's like she says, I'm a conservative Christian woman who researches all points of view. So apparently not a bit.
Welcome.
Welcome. Appreciate you listening. But I do think it's strange that you don't want to go to Starbucks, presumably because they have like red cups at Christmas is what we're talking about there. I'm not totally sure.
I'm not sure, but call us. Let us know why. We're happy to entertain that, and hope you'll stick around to hear a little bit about labor solidarity, interracial people power, what it takes, to transform the system to be a little bit better for everyday people.
There you go. Let's get to Boss Watch. Bosses, Last Week in Southern Labor is a segment that we do every week where we take a look at what workers in the U.S. South and the American colonies were up to. And Boss Watch is kind of the mirror image of that. We take a look at what bosses in the U.S. South and the American colonies were up to. So we're going to start this week in Georgia, where a federal administrative law judge has ruled that CSX Transportation, a subsidiary of one of the nation's largest transportation companies, must pay a total of almost $500,000 to 2 railroad workers who were wrongfully terminated for exercising their federally protected rights to report workplace safety concerns. The company must also reinstate the workers. The decision by the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Administrative Law Judges follows a whistleblower investigation by the department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration of CSX Transportation's actions in November 2017 after the workers reported a blue flag on the tracks at a Waycross, Georgia rail yard, signaling that they could not move their train safely. In response, the company removed them from the assignment and later fired them. OSHA determined that CSX's response violated federal protections for workers raising safety issues. This from OSHA Regional Administrator Kurt Petermeyer in Atlanta. Quote, the Federal Railroad Safety Act protects workers' rights to report safety concerns without fear of retaliation. When employers like CSX Transportation retaliate against workers for raising safety concerns, they create an environment of fear that can lead to dangerous and sometimes deadly situations. The workers did what they were supposed to do. They saw that the tracks were deemed unsafe. They communicated the issue and waited for further instructions. Despite following protocol, they were fired for the delay. This retaliatory behavior is unacceptable. The sum cited in the judge's order includes about $250,000 in back wages plus compound daily interest, $100,000 for emotional distress, and $100,000 for punitive damages for the 2 workers. CSX Transportation must also pay one of the workers about $5,000 for the health insurance premiums paid after their termination. CSX Transportation must also reinstate the workers to their previous positions and seniority had they not suffered the wrongful termination and pay their reasonable attorney's fees and litigation expenses. The decision is the latest of several in which federal officials has found CSX Transportation violating federal whistleblower regulations and retaliating against workers who reported safety concerns. In July 2021, OSHA ordered the employer to pay about $250,000 in back wages, interest, and damages to a worker terminated similarly in New Orleans. In October 2020, OSHA ordered CSX to reinstate an employee and pay more than $95,000 in back wages and $75,000 in damages after an employee in Rebecca, Georgia reported an unsafe customer gate and an on-the-job injury. Similar whistleblower investigations at a locomotive shop in 2016 and at a dispatch office in 2010 in Selkirk, New York led to reinstatements and payments of back wages and damages to employees. In Kentucky, the U.S. Department of Labor has reached an agreement with a Glasgow-based chain of restaurants requiring the enterprise to pay $250,000 in penalties and to take steps to ensure future compliance with federal child labor laws after investigators learned that the enterprise employed a child under the legal working age and employed 37 other teens to work more hours than the law permits. This settlement follows an investigation by the department's Wage and Hour Division that determined that El Mazatlan Incorporated violated federal child labor regulations by employing 37 children ages 14 and 15 years old to work longer and later than the Fair Labor Standards Act allows. El Mazatlan also employed a 13-year-old child, which is under the legal age limit. In addition to paying penalties, El Mazatlan agreed to future compliance and to create and update child labor training materials in their management training program. The employer will also conduct training with all supervisors and managers. Learning new skills, this from the Wage and Hour Division District Director Karen Garnett Civils in Louisville, Kentucky. Learning new skills in the workforce is an important part of growing up, but we must protect children and ensure their first jobs do not interfere with their education or well-being. The Fair Labor Standards Act allows for developmental experiences but restricts the hours and occupations of workers under age 16 and provides for penalties when employers do not follow the law. In addition to child labor violations, the division found El Mazatlan illegally deducted the costs of uniforms from the wages of servers, causing their wages to drop below the federal minimum wage. The employer also failed to pay overtime to 3 salaried employees who were not exempt from the FLSA's overtime requirements. After its investigation, the division recovered $50,000 in back wages and an equal amount in liquidated damages for 168 employees. We found, this from Garnett Civils again, we found El Mazatlan liable for significant penalties as well as back wages and damages totaling more than $350,000. The Wage and Hour Division is committed to protecting workers' rights and holding employers responsible and accountable when they fail to pay employees in compliance with the law. Heading over to Tennessee, the U.S. Department of Labor has obtained a federal consent decree requiring a Clark Range lumber producer to stop violating federal child labor regulations, pay penalties for their violations, and surrender profits earned for products made while violations occurred. Entered in the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee, the consent decree comes after the department's Wage and Hour Division found that Plateau Sawmill employed 2 children as young as 14 years old at the sawmill to unload wooden boards from a conveyor belt in violation of child labor provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act. In addition, the sawmill employed a 13-year-old, which violated the FLSA's minimum age standard of 14 years for non-agricultural work. Investigators learned that the 3 children worked as early as 6 a.m., an hour earlier than the law permits. The sawmill operator was ordered to pay about $73,000 in civil money penalties for its child labor violations. The sawmill operator was also ordered to surrender $10,000 in profits earned between May 26 and June 26, 2024. These funds will be used to benefit the children employed illegally. Federal labor laws protect children from being employed in dangerous jobs. By employing minors to do hazardous work, Plateau Sawmill put children at risk of serious harm or worse, said Wage and Hour Regional Director Juan Correa in Atlanta. Once we learned of the employer's violations, the Department of Labor acted immediately to hold the company accountable for failing to protect these children. In addition to paying civil money penalties, disgorging profits, and agreeing to comply with federal child labor regulations in the future, Plateau Sawmill agreed to do the following: audit machinery at all of its establishments to identify equipment deemed hazardous by the FLSA and mark the identified equipment with stickers to alert employees that no one under 18 can operate it. Review and enhance existing policies and training manuals related to compliance with federal child labor regulations. The employer must also revise its policies, training materials, and programs for management, employees and new hires as it onboards them at any owned establishment, and more. In fiscal year 2023, the department investigated almost 1,000 cases with child labor violations involving almost 6,000 children nationwide, including 500 children employed in violation of hazardous occupation standards. The department addressed these violations by assessing employers more than $8 million in civil money penalties. Heading back over to Georgia, the U.S. Department of Labor announced that Ball Container LLC, a subsidiary of Ball Corporation, has entered into a conciliation agreement in which the employee will pay over $300,000 in back wages and interest to resolve alleged race-based hiring discrimination at the company's beverage manufacturing facility in Rome. A routine compliance review by the department's Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs found that from February 1st, 2020 through January 31st, 2021, the employer discriminated against 192 black applicants for production technician positions at the facility. The agency determined that Ball Container's actions violated Executive Order 11246, which prohibits federal contractors from discriminating in employment based on race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or national origin. In addition to paying back wages and interest, Ball Container agreed to provide 4 jobs eligible to class members when positions became available, review and revise its hiring practices, and provide training to all managers, supervisors, and other company officials involved in the hiring process. We have several dishonorable mentions this week. The EPA announced that Argos Puerto Rico Corporation, owner and operator of a cement manufacturing plant in Dorado, Puerto Rico, reached an agreement to settle Clean Air Act violations, pay a $111,000 penalty, and pay more than $200,000 in supplemental environmental projects, and spend more than $200,000 in supplemental environmental projects to install solar energy at a nearby school and child care facility. The investigation found that Argos violated several parts of the Clean Air Maximum Achievable Control Technology standards for cement manufacturers. Specifically, Argos did not meet the standards for dioxins and furans emissions for 130 days. Total hydrocarbon testing for 1 day, and mercury emissions monitoring for 19 days. Additionally, Argos failed to comply with reporting requirements 12 times. In another dishonorable mention, the EPA recently reached settlements with over a dozen companies across Georgia for alleged violations of the asbestos requirements of the Clean Air Act. Alleged violations include the failure to conduct a thorough inspection for asbestos-containing materials prior to beginning demolition or renovation activities, and failure to provide written notice at least 10 days prior to beginning demolition activity. The fines ranged from $195 to $8,223. An investigation by the U.S. Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division determined that Wonder City Rehabilitation and Nursing Center in Virginia violated federal law when it failed to pay health and welfare benefits of 2 employees, provide sick leave to 11 employees, and maintain accurate records in violation of the McNamara-O'Hara service contract and Executive Order 13706 establishing paid sick leave for federal contractors. The department recovered over $22,000 in health and welfare benefits for 2 employees and $1,800 in paid sick leave for 8 employees, and about 25 hours of paid sick leave restored for 3 employees. And the U.S. Department of Labor recovered $154,000 in back wages and liquidated damages from Primex Plastics Corporation, an international plastics manufacturer in Georgia that willfully failed to include bonus payments when calculating overtime for 743 workers. The consent decree also required the employer to pay $130,000 in civil money penalties to the department for the willful nature of the violations. And finally, the U.S. Department of Labor has obtained a court order assessing the operator of a Rosedale, Louisiana farm $12,000 in civil money penalties and preventing the Louisiana employers from applying for H-2A certification to bring foreign workers to the U.S. to fill temporary or seasonal agricultural jobs for 1 year, after investigators found that the farm's operator intimidated and threatened workers in violation of the law. that's going to be it for the first half of the program this week. Like I said, we've got a really exciting second half of the program. We're going to be talking to a couple of authors about labor councils and about their book about labor councils called Central Labor Councils and the Revival of American Unionism. Make sure you tune in for the second half of the program so you hear that conversation. We're also going to be reacting to a couple of clips from Teamsters President Sean O'Brien on Theo Vaughn's podcast, where we think that he gives a bad definition of unions. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Adam, you got anything else before we wrap up here on the first half of the program?
Just don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. That really does help. If you're listening on a podcast app, give us a 5-star review. If you're listening on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel. You'll see our clips throughout the week. And don't forget, you can call in 844-899-TVLR. That's 844-899-8857. We'd love to take your call or leave us a voicemail throughout the week.
All right, folks. I see that Donovan in the chat says NALC locals are having a day of action October 14th across the nation to protest over 500 days without a contract. Donovan, if you would like to call in, we can take your call right at the beginning of the second half of the program because I would like to hear more about that and maybe be able to try to plan to go. So if you want to give us a call, the phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That's 844-899-8857. Anybody can call in, and you can leave us a voicemail if you're listening to us after we're live. If you don't stay tuned for the second half of the program, we will see you next week. All right, folks, we are off the radio now. We're going to take a break really quick and be right back with Overtime. Stay tuned.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Folks, welcome back. You are still listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. Appreciate you staying tuned for the second half of the program. If you're listening to us as a podcast, make sure you give us a 5-star rating. We love those 5-star ratings, particularly if it is on Apple, trying to catch up to the liberal podcast, news podcasts in Alabama. Already ahead of them on Spotify, but we got to get up there. Got to pump those numbers up for Apple Podcast. The phone number is 844. Sorry, had a hiccup. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. If you would like to call in, the phones are working. We tested them out this morning, so they should be good to go. Adam, you had a couple of plugs that you wanted to get to at the top here.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind folks, especially those of you tuning in from WMMT, our newest audience in Kentucky, just wanted to remind folks a little bit about where all we air and what we do here at the Valley Labor Report. For those of you who don't know, we air live on WVNN. That is the right-wing talk radio station in Huntsville, Athens, Alabama. And so every Saturday from 9:30 to 11 a.m. Central Time, we are live on that radio station. It is pretty much the only non-right-wing content on the station there, is my understanding. Of course, at 11 a.m. Central Time is when we begin overtime. That's what we're in right now. We used to say that was online only on YouTube and Facebook, but WMMT does air this segment of the episode, so we really appreciate that. We got our start on WVNN. That's the first station we aired on. It's the birthplace of Sean Hannity and home to all sorts of reactionary propaganda that we find pretty objectionable. But we do think it's important to get a different perspective out there to multiple audiences. We're happy that a portion of the show is replayed during the week on WZZA, the historic black radio station in northwest Alabama in the Shoals area. And we also air on WHIV, a community radio station in New Orleans. We released the full episode on Spotify, Apple, and all the various podcasting apps. So again, as Jacob said, please subscribe to us on your app of choice and give us a good review. It really does mean a lot to us. And throughout the week, clips of the show are released as standalone videos on YouTube and occasionally on TikTok, though typically just on YouTube. You can follow us at the Valley Labor Report, right? So if there's a segment that you missed, or there was an interview that you missed, or there was just something in particular about an episode you were interested to see, maybe didn't have time for the full thing, that's totally cool. We try to make this content as accessible as possible for folks. We try to make it easy to find. All of this is free, all of the content that we do. So just do us a favor and please hit subscribe and like. Special thanks to all of you who donate, all of you who comment in the YouTube chat or Facebook chat, those of you who call in, leave voicemails. That stuff really does mean a lot to us as well. All of you who've liked us, shared us, reviewed us. We really appreciate your engagement on social media and the apps. It helps build our audience. It's a quick, easy, free way to support the program. If you believe it's important to have our own media of, by, and for Southern working class folks, please do consider supporting us however you can. And please share with your coworkers, friends, family, and neighbors. We know there's a lot of good causes out there to support, and our audience are working folks with limited incomes. So if you do find value in our project and you're willing to chip in a couple bucks, it really would mean a lot to us. We've got some great stuff planned as we continue to grow this project, and we can't do it without you. So thank you to everyone who does support the Valley Labor Report. We know that it has made an impact on folks. We have, received a lot of comments over the years from folks who were inspired or educated in some way. Like I ran into folks at the United Campus Workers who joined their union because they heard about it on the Valley Labor Report. We ran into someone recently who told us he was a guest on our show talking about worker ownership and cooperatives. Another listener of our program heard the interview, reached out to him, and actually partnered with him to transition their business into a worker-owned business. Right, that's really, really cool. We've heard, anecdotes like that. So I do want to encourage folks, if there is some value that you find in this project, if there's something you like or appreciate about what we do, leave us a voicemail or send us an email, send us something in the chat. Let us know if you have any good stories like that. If you know that the Valley Labor Report has made some kind of positive difference and you think it's worth sharing, we really appreciate that, and we like to collect those stories. It helps to share those with folks. So those are my plugs, just my pitch to continue supporting this project. The truth is that the bosses and politicians have their media. Everyday working folks, we don't have much media. There are some good folks doing great work in the labor media space, but it's not enough. And particularly here in the South, talk radio is so dominated by the far right. The stuff that they say on these radio stations is often just disturbing, and it's not reflected in the realities that working people experience day to day. And so I think it's important that we put out that different message. It does cost for us to be on commercial radio, but we think there's value in that, in reaching people who maybe otherwise would not hear us. We do want people who aren't convinced. We want people who are different, who may disagree. We want to reach those folks and, put out a message of solidarity over bigotry, and put out a message of the power of working people coming together, collective organization, collective action. When working people come together and we unionize and we build strong unions, we can make a better community and a better country. It's good for this country to have more unions, and people need to hear that message. So thank you for everyone who offers your support.
Absolutely. We only have a couple of minutes left before our guests come on for the second half of the show, so don't have time right now. We're going to get to the reacting to Sean O'Brien on Theo Von after we talk to our guests. Because I want to have plenty of time to talk about that. So, Adam, you're going to have a labor history workshop about a week from Tuesday, right, on the 22nd. What are you going to be talking about at the labor history work? Like, what kind of stuff are you going to be going over?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'm really excited to start the workshop with an opening activity. I'm going to have folks work on a timeline. We're going to have a timeline on the wall. Over the past century, think of events that have affected worker power, right? Anything you can think of that has somehow affected the power of working people in this country, in this state, in this community, right? It could be local or state issues. It could be national or global issues. It could be an election. It could be a war. It could be a natural disaster. It could be any number of things. But I want to get folks thinking right off the bat, what are some of the things that have happened over the past 100 years that have affected working folks, right? What are some historical events that are worth knowing, worth thinking about? And so that's a good warm-up activity, I think, as I transition into, the presentation, so to speak. And where I typically start is just asking folks what they know about when we gained our union rights. It's a question worth asking, like, when did we actually gain the legal right to come together and form a union? And some folks are not aware, right, that was as recent as the 1930s. It did not happen until the New Deal, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt was in office. The 1930s was the biggest upsurge of labor organizing ever seen since then. It was the biggest we had ever seen. And so we typically start there and then take a step back and look at the broad timeline. Folks may not know, but the first trade union formed in the United States while George Washington was president, right? The first strike took place before the Declaration of Independence, right? So workers organizing, forming unions, going on strike, it's as old as this country. And so that's one of the key messages in this presentation, is that despite what some bosses and politicians may try to pretend or convince you to believe, here in Alabama, unions are just as Alabama and part of our culture and part of our home as football and sweet tea and biscuits and gravy. It's part of our heritage. Alabama, at one time, 1 in 4 of our people belonged to a labor union. At one time, Walker County, Alabama was the most unionized county in the whole country. We had the UMWA, the United Mine Workers, were organizing interracially at the height of Jim Crow and white supremacy in this state. Segregation was the law of the land, and yet white and black coal miners were coming together to build power in the workplace and in the community. Those are stories that we ought to know. Those are stories that have been suppressed. We have less and less folks in our state are familiar with this history. It used to be much more common that even if you hadn't had a union experience, you had a father, an uncle, a mother, an aunt, a sister, somebody who had been touched by the labor movement. But that's increasingly less the case. Folks are now generations removed from some of this history and this heritage. So it's really important that we educate folks. Working people often do not have our stories told. And that's in the contemporary media, but that's also in our history. I am a former high school history teacher, and one thing that I really was intentional about was trying to empower folks to see themselves in history and see the way that everyday people have made change, because change typically comes from the bottom up. It's everyday people banding together, coming together and organizing to make change. That's how most positive changes have taken place in our history. And so I think that's really an essential message that we get across to people. People have to know their heritage. They have to know that everyday folks just like them, with similar struggles and similar issues and similar concerns, that they also, they stood up and they made things better. They made things different. So that's really the point of it. But it is a broad outline. We'll talk everything from, early roots of American labor, such as the AFL and the Knights of Labor, into that 1930s labor upsurge and the CIO, and wrap up with some reflections on the more contemporary era in the last 50 years of neoliberalism. Talk a little bit about what that word even means and the new Gilded Age experience that we're in, and what that means for the future. So I'm really excited about it, and like I mentioned earlier, we plan to take this online. So if you're not local and you can attend in Huntsville on the 22nd of October at the North Huntsville Library at 6 p.m. If you can't make that, no worries. I have already been booked to appear on Good Morning Comrade, friends of the show, and we'll be talking about it there. And I think we're going to have some partnership to bring this thing into the World Wide Web. Make it a webinar coming up soon. So really excited about it.
Awesome. Have we got now Stuart and Immanuel in the Zoom? Stuart's in. Don't see Immanuel. We'll go ahead and get started then. Stuart Eimer is a co-chair of the Department of Sociology and associate professor at Widener University. Immanuel Ness, who we're still waiting on, is a professor of political science at Brooklyn College. Stuart, welcome to the Valley Labor Report. Thanks for taking the time.
Here with you today.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So you wrote with Immanuel this book over 20 years ago. I don't know how you feel about me saying that. Central Labor Councils and the Revival of American Unionism, Organizing for Justice in Our Communities. And, I guess the first question to ask is, what made you want to write about Central Labor Councils in 2000, 2001?
I can tell you it's been reissued in 2016, so it still is relevant.
I agree. I just read it last year, so.
Yeah, I was happy to see that, because sometimes I feel old. So what made us write and edit the book? was a combination of things. There had been a change in the direction of the AFL-CIO in, I guess it was 96, 95, with the new voices of John Sweeney. And you saw a lot of new energy, both on the ground, but also in the culture about unions and trying to reinvigorate the movement. And some of this movement was happening at the regional level all across the country, right? The book details case studies that occurred in Milwaukee, San Jose, Seattle, all over, in Atlanta in the South. The last person was just talking about the sort of invisible history of unions in the South. And he's right, there's a long and rich history. And we felt as though these regional labor bodies had an important role to play in all sorts of arenas, whether it be coordinating local politics, trying to create living wage movements, trying to articulate and advance economic development agendas. And we just saw this happening. And then I was actually a graduate student at the time and was doing research on labor councils. The book has a kind of a history of labor councils in it that I wrote. And we were, I don't know, we became aware that this is sort of an invisible part of the labor movement, that it's been a key institutions really since the beginning, since the 1880s, and they've played a role in many cities, very, very important roles, but we're kind of invisible. So we were committed to trying to shine a light on the role of these institutions historically, and some of what they've done, some of the challenges they faced, and then to really kind of highlight many of the accomplishments that were occurring in the late 90s, early 2000s. So that book was, I guess, Manny's idea, and we met each other, and then I was just really tapped into this stuff that was happening, and we put the book together, and it was pretty well received, and still relevant today, I hope.
I definitely agree. It's really interesting. I don't know if I mentioned this in the emails, but I'm president of the Labor Council here in North Alabama. My co-host here, Adam, is one of our trustees and chair of the political committee. And, so I definitely found some things that I want to try to do here. And so, you mentioned that it's kind of something of a compilation of case studies. And so I'm interested in what some of your key takeaways were as you were, compiling, because it's, a series of, it's not all written by you. It's written by several different authors and then edited by you and Ness. And so what were some of the key things that you took away back in 2001 when you wrote it and you compiled it? What were some of the things that you were thinking as you were compiling and writing this book?
Well, I think a lot of the lessons learned both about the past and about what was going on then, and that, quite honestly, are still relevant, is that there's just a lot of opportunity at the regional level. That a lot of our economic development happens regionally, right? We try to track companies into particular regions. People tend to live and stay in the regions in which they were born, right? People have roots there. Political capacity at the local and county level are often, I don't know, underappreciated, how important they are, how much work can be done at the city council level, at the county board level. And that in all of these cases, what you saw were leadership, often, newer leadership, people who'd often kind of cut their teeth and become trained as activists in the 60s, had taken or been elected to positions of power in their councils. And they just saw the opportunity that, here we are in, let's say, Milwaukee, and we can't address the problems as just a labor movement or as one particular union. We need to begin to really forge ties between teachers and nurses and carpenters and bus drivers, and try to get unions to think of themselves not just in terms of their own parochial collective bargaining interests, which of course are important. It's really the main reason local unions exist, and they're legally obligated to really pursue that. but that labor councils provide a space for folks to come together and talk across their unions, to talk across their particular struggles, to learn about each other, struggles, to support each other when people are organizing, people are going on strike, etc. But then the Labor Council also gives the labor movement an opportunity to connect with environmentalists, with housing activists, with local political actors, and to try to broaden the scope of what unions as individual locals can do, and to build a movement. And really, that's what the role of labor councils has been since the 1880s, is to try to fashion individual unions into a broader workers' movement. And in the best case scenario, those workers' movements are forming alliances with other stakeholders in the community. And, the book details whether it's Milwaukee or Atlanta or in San Jose, Seattle, different coalitions that came together and different issues that were being pursued. But what they had in common was that this council was out of, separate local unions, creating a much more powerful labor movement. And that labor movement was then building alliances beyond labor and trying to address, a broad range of issues in their particular metropolitan area. And we saw that had potential. And I still think it has a lot of potential. And it's still very important. I can run on and on and on. I'll just say one more thing. I'll let you come back in. But I'm doing research on labor council, or not on labor council, on SEIU organizing in Charlotte in the South. And a lot of SEIU's airport organizing depends on building the capacity at the local level to get, say, the city of Philadelphia to mandate a certain wage, or the Port Authority in New York to mandate a certain wage. They're actually taking wages out of collective bargaining, and they're becoming politically mandated. And for that strategy to work in places like, let's say, Charlotte, you need to build political capacity of the sort that unions no longer have in many cities, particularly in the South, where unions tend to have much less power and lower levels of density. And the Labor Council has become a crucial point for people trying to organize the airports, to go, to share the struggles with other people, to get support from existing unions for pickets and whatnot, but also then to begin to build the political capacity to try to move some of these local city councils, county boards in a more pro-labor direction. No one union can do it alone. There's a role for these labor councils. That's right. A mouthful, but I hope I answered your question.
No, absolutely. And pivoting a little bit from that final topic and going back to something that you mentioned earlier and something that's touched on in the book about organizing capacity, that's been something that I have been most interested in wanting to support my affiliates and see the affiliates support each other is, in organizing capacity and helping each other, build our unions, organize new workplaces and things like that. And that's actually one of, I think, the most difficult things structurally for a labor council to do. And, I find that labor councils across the country, they fall into a really easy kind of niche where they become, Democratic Party endorsement machines, and they, write $500 checks in municipal elections and $1,000 checks in state elections and things like that. And then maybe on, it's some of the higher levels, maybe they have, voter outreach programs and things like that. But I find that most of the engagement is on kind of the political level, and I think there's a really important role for that, and central labor councils make a really intuitive kind of, they intuitively make sense as a place for labor to engage politically. But I do think that there's a really undertapped, that labor councils represent an untapped opportunity for organizing support. And one of the chapters speaks to that specifically, building organizing capacity at the King County Labor Council by Jonathan Rosenblum. And so I wonder if you could talk about that chapter specifically, and then generally what you see as opportunities for labor councils to support organizing work and what some of the structural difficulties of that are.
I cannot speak to that chapter. I apologize. It's been a long time since
Sure.
I
No
engaged
worries.
it, but I can speak to the topic. And I agree with what you just stated, that often the political is the most obvious. And I agree that often the political is woefully inadequate, right? They're just endorsement machines that send letters to people that mean almost nothing. And we have evidence that getting a letter means nothing. When you can actually do more focused GOTV things, hi, I'm a carpenter. I see here that you're a nurse. Or are you aware of this election? And you're knocking on doors and doing phone calls. That's something CLCs can do that really no one else is positioned to do. And we know from evidence, research that's done by Zulo at Michigan, that has an effect. It matters. It will increase turnout, and that's important. On the organizing, my experience was that a lot of local unions don't know how to organize, and it's still my experience that there's, you know better than I do as a labor council leader that most unions they don't have full-time staff. They're run by people who are already working full-time jobs, and then they're also the union president. They may have never organized anybody. They've been part of a union that's been there for however long, and they don't have the capacity or the knowledge really to put someone on staff to try to figure out how to build density in their particular sector. And labor councils offer an opportunity as an institution to have or to supplement that capacity. There was a time when I was most familiar with Milwaukee, where they had garnered the resources to put an organizer on staff, and that organizer could be utilized by different locals who needed guidance, who needed support, who needed capacity. And I remember this woman telling me how people would just tell her, we have no idea what to do. We don't know how to organize. Why would you know how to organize if it's not something you've ever done before? And labor councils, being the closest, to the ground, in the ideal world, would have people on staff who could then be utilized around the region to help initiate, to support, to guide. That takes resources. And one of the things that has frustrated me is that, it's voluntary affiliation to labor councils. They're often under-resourced. They don't have the money and to give them the capacity they need to facilitate new organizing. I think short of actually having organizers on staff, one thing unions can do or labor councils can do is mutual support. So organizing is hard, right? It's a big deal. People face tremendous pushback from bosses. They may be fired. They may be intimidated. And when, a bunch of baggage handlers go out on strike and it's a one-day action and there's just a handful of them, and that's hard. And if 100 people from the labor council show up and there's 15 painters and 12 nurses and some plumbers and a bunch of machinists, that means something, right? And even if it's not organizing, not building the capacity, but that show of solidarity means something, and courage is contagious. And knowing that you're not in it alone is important. And that's something labor councils can do, even without, having people on staff and having the resources to organize. And I think that's an important and maybe underappreciated thing. I don't know if that's the sort of thing you do, but I think it can be very important.
I definitely think that that's really important, and that people do get a lot out of seeing people from other industries and seeing that connection that, I'm a postal worker and I'm in a union. You're a machinist and you're in a union, and that means we're the same. We're a part of the same movement, and I think that labor councils are a vehicle by which you can do that really kind of basic political education on, the nature of class and the fact that you definitionally as a union member are going to be part of the working class, and that you have that in common with your fellow workers, and that you should support one another when you have struggles and organizing campaigns and things like that. So I've always found that picket line visits and supporting one another's rallies has been something that people really appreciate, and seeing that more than just themselves care about their conditions of employment. I think that's been really helpful. And so, you alluded earlier in the conversation to the fact that you wrote the book in a time that's kind of similar to this one, in that there's a lot of energy around union reform, labor upsurge, labor revitalization. Ron Kerry had recently won the first ever direct election to the Teamsters international presidency, although he was pushed out not long after that for what ultimately I think the consensus was BS. The New Voices slate won the leadership of the National AFL-CIO. And so what was it like to be writing about labor at that time, and what are the differences and similarity to today?
It was, I'm going to sound like young and naive, but maybe I was, but it was kind of exciting, right? Because there really was an upsurge, and it was being noticed everywhere. And, Sweeney was pretty articulate. It was getting a lot of attention. We need to not just build bridges, we need to block bridges, and he would be at, civil disobedience and things of that sort. And there was the Union Cities movement to really try to reinvigorate these labor councils. And there was a feeling that, it's an aircraft carrier, and it takes a lot, to turn an aircraft carrier. But the process had begun, and that, maybe we would see a newfound energy from the AFL-CIO at all its levels. And you kind of did for a while, right? The Union Cities, you had Union Summer to train young activists, and there was a push to kind of tool the political action, the COPEs. And then, hopefully Manny will join us at some point, because he's kept more abreast at researching things since. My sense is that that energy kind of dissipated, that, kind of as I predicted, I think in my chapter, that, if you don't put the resources there, if these councils are just voluntary and local unions don't have to join, and free rider problems abound, it's been the same story since the 1880s. The councils just don't have the resources they need to sustain activism and organizing and politics. And it seems to me that sort of withered, that the labor, not just the labor council, but the energy at all levels receded. And it's just not as visible to me. A lot of the upsurge we see now, and I do think there's an upsurge, but it doesn't seem to be coming out of the AFL or the state feds or the labor councils, right? It's, coming from Workers United and young people who, decided to organize Starbucks. It's coming out of the Amazon workers in New York. It's, I'm very interested in SEIU's organized tens of thousands of airport workers. You just noted the UAW. I was in Tennessee not long ago and got to meet and hear from some of these Chattanooga workers, which is just astounding, right? Such a huge victory in the South. But it seems like it's coming from more from internationals that have committed to organizing, that have put the resources into building the labor movement and are doing so in a very aggressive fashion. And to the extent that the AFL-CIO is involved with that, I can't really say. It doesn't seem to me that it's front and center. And I'm not sure why that is, whether I don't think it's an ideological problem. I do think at all levels there's a very serious commitment to building the movement. I'm guessing it has more to do with resources, but can't say for sure. I don't know what you're at the local level. I'm not sure if you have a sense of what's happened and why that energy may have had dissipated. But to me, it seems to be coming from elsewhere.
Yes, I would definitely agree with that. The energy is not coming from the Federation, and I think that's unfortunate. Interestingly, the history of this labor council that we're a part of is that it was formed at least in the iteration before we came in. That iteration of it was formed in 1987. I don't know if there existed a labor council in North Alabama before that, but it was formed in 1987, which is kind of an interesting year to form a labor council, I think. And then it was dechartered in 2017, just before I entered the workforce and got a union job, because the unions that really held it together were the UAW at Chrysler and the paper workers at paper mills, and then the rubber workers at a tire manufacturing facility. And all of those industries left Huntsville. Dunlop closed, Chrysler closed, and the paper mill closed. And the paper mill was the last one to close. It closed, I think, in 2014. And so 3 years after that, the people who were from the paper mill, who were leading the council, did not do, the kind of basic stuff as far as, even filing with the IRS or anything like that. And so they had their tax exempt status revoked, and then the AFL revoked their charter. And then we got some unions back in 2019, and we rechartered the Labor Council, got the new charter in 2020. So, but so obviously the energy was not coming from the Labor Council here. It's coming from other places. And I spoke to, I don't know if you know of Barry Eidlin. He is also an academic, and I think back in the 90s, I think he was staff with TDU, and he said that one of the things that he's identified, or he feels like he's identified in the difference in the reform efforts, is that, not just that one situation came from the more federated bodies and the other from international, but more that in the 90s and early 2000s, it was like staff of unions were just fed up with losing, and there were enough of them, enough of the leadership and the staff of unions were fed up and wanted to try to change. And it was a really kind of top-down reform effort. Whereas today, what we're seeing, at least in his telling, and I think that this kind of tracks with the way that I'm seeing it, is that today people from the rank and file are pushing up against leaders that are maybe not doing enough, or what the rank and file thinks they should be. And so hopefully, if that kind of prognosis, or if that's the right word, if that kind of evaluation of the situation is true, then maybe there's a little bit more staying power with the bottom-up kind of revitalization that will sustain these organizations into the future, and can be used to build not only their unions, but also more active and interesting federated bodies like labor councils, state feds, and the National Federation. I'm interested in what you think about kind of my and Eidlin's.
I'm not. I think sometimes this becomes an either or when really it's a both. So if you just take the UAW, for instance, so there's a push, locally, or not locally, but bottom up to change the leadership. But right now the organizing is I hate top down, sounds like a loaded word, but I don't really think it is. But there's nationally directed campaigns to win in Chattanooga, to win in the new battery plants, to win in the South, right? That's being directed out of Detroit with resources and staff and people who, are very committed to organizing the South. And then, what I see happening at the airports is also, it's a national commitment to trying to organize the airports and to do so nationwide, but also focusing on the South. And then, the resources are then committed, and you get a sort of, bottom up. You get the rank and file. You get a lot of organizing that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So I think the two of them are, I don't know. I don't want to use the word dialectically interconnected, but maybe that's it. They inform each other. There's they reinforce each other. And I think it was the same way in the 30s. So there were, people in the CIO who were, trained activists from different different parties, different ideological perspectives, and were crucial in, let's say the auto industry or the steel industry. But it was also dependent on massive investments from the CIO, from the garment workers, from the mine workers, and organizers who could come into those communities and could help organize and facilitate things. So I think it's let a thousand flower bloom, thousand flowers bloom. I think you need all this to happen. One thing that Eidlin has talked about, and it's not original to him, I don't think, is the militant minority, and the idea that very small groups of people can often do astounding things. And that was true in the 30s. Some of these plants would just have a small number of people who were trained activists, and then you would have coordination coming from the national. And as I said before, courage can be courageous. When 50 people in a plant of 1,000 take courageous action, a lot of other people will join in. And I think that's the same sort of thing now, that small groups of committed people at Starbucks, for instance, can I don't know, encourage, empower many, many, many more people. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And I know Eidlin has talked about that, and I agree with that very much.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the political role of labor councils, what were some of the things that some of the labor councils that you studied were able to do better than kind of the easy rut of, we endorse and we're going to write a check and that's basically it? What were some of the innovations that some of the labor councils that you studied, what were some of the innovations that they did?
Well, the one I'm most familiar with, and I'm still doing research on, I still do work on councils, but it's mostly historical, was the CIO in New York, which was a left-led union, or left council. So you had, different unions that were affiliated with the Communist Party, sometimes the Socialist Party. So you had a lot of ideologically very progressive people in it. The Labor Council was very well resourced and committed to building a movement. You mentioned before class, right? Building a movement that spoke not just for the individual unions, but spoke for the working class. And they were committed to, advancing all sorts of things, from advocating about the price of meat to getting more parks and hospitals, and really addressing things that working class New Yorkers needed. And a lot of what they did is not rocket science, and they did it before the computers existed. They would map the union members, right? And they knew where every union member in New York City lived, right? They knew the wards, the districts, the blocks, and they would, at election time, coordinate and have union members knock on every other union member's door. I realize that you are a meat packer and I am a member of the newspaper guild, but are you aware of this election? Are you registered to vote? Most people don't pay attention to politics the way the two of us do. Most people are busy trying to, live their lives and feed their kids and do whatever it is that they do. And the labor councils would go and would knock on every door and register and educate, and then election day, make sure people got out to vote, make sure they had ways to get to the polls, and just had tremendous capacity. And this is in the 40s, right? There's really no reason that this can't happen again. Some councils do this better than others, or at least they did when I was studying it. Milwaukee was very good at this. I'm not sure if they continued to do that. I can tell you where I live. I'm in South Jersey here. There's a labor council. We don't get any communication from the labor council. We get from my wife's union a letter that says vote for these people, and that's basically it. And the research suggests that's really not effective at all. And then labor councils also have the ability, and they did this in New York, and they were doing it in Milwaukee when I was studying them in the 90s, to build their own political institutions. So you mentioned before the Democrats, and there's a long history of labor councils saying, you know what, Democrats are inadequate, and we need to have a labor party in Milwaukee or in New York City. And we have the capacity to elect people to city council, to county boards, sometimes the state assembly, because we're so concentrated. And labor councils did that historically all over the place. And then depending on the states and what the rules were, so in New York, where I'm most familiar, you can't really play at the gubernatorial level because it's statewide. You can't really play at the presidential level, but they had the ability to use fusion to cross endorse. So you would have the Labor Council in New York City endorsing the American Labor Party, structurally connected to the Labor Party, funding it the way labor parties in Europe are funded by unions. And they would endorse locally because they could really win. But when it got to the level of, say, President Roosevelt, and they couldn't really endorse or run a third party candidate credibly, they would endorse President Roosevelt. So a union member could go into the ballot booth in New York City and vote American Labor Party for city council and maybe county and then maybe even state assembly. But then as it got further up, they would vote for President Roosevelt, the gubernatorial candidate. And what that did was it gave labor tremendous power, because President Roosevelt would not have won New York State without the American Labor Party in, I guess it was 40, 44, and 40. And the unions could point to, look, you needed our 7% of the vote. I don't know the exact number, but it was significant. And that came from the unions. And you need to answer to the unions. If not, maybe next time we will run an independent candidate. So, some of that was permitted by the unique laws that New York has and that Vermont has. There are a few states that still have these laws. But a lot of the most basic stuff was just, rolling up your sleeves and doing the grassroots organizing that is still possible, right? It's still possible to figure out who are the union members in this region. Let's go knock on some doors. It just takes capacity, and it takes planning. It takes bodies. It takes boots on the ground. But that's traditionally been something that unions can do. And I still think that's I don't know, it's a missed opportunity. You said before, in some ways, the politics is the most obvious, and you would think so, but yet it's just not done.
Right. We so, because of my interest in, focusing on the organizing piece, we haven't yet done much political stuff here, just because I really want to push back against falling into the trap of just endorsing and not doing anything else. I've been kind of a mind that if we're going to endorse, we should really do it. And we did this time. We endorsed two union members for city council and school board. And the city council candidate won. So, we have now soon to be sworn in a union member on Huntsville City Council, one of 5 of the city councilors, the first black woman to be on Huntsville's city council. We went out and knocked doors for her. And I enjoyed it a lot more than I did when I was in, the college Democrats, Father, forgive me for I have sinned. And, being able to say, I'm a union member. I see that you're a union member. Do you want to vote for a union-endorsed union member for city council? Like, that was really, really cool. And everybody that I've talked to, or most of the people that I've talked to that did the door knocking with us, enjoyed it as well, and thought it was a pretty kind of unique opportunity to be able to do that. So yeah, I totally agree that, when you do it and you do it well, I think there's a lot of opportunity there to really kind of shape, especially local politics.
Yeah, I used to name some of my papers and presentations the challenge of organizing the organized, because with union density at 10% and private sector 6% and even lower in Alabama, right, we have tremendous challenge of organizing the unorganized, right? We all are aware of what has to be done if we're going to reverse the decline of organized labor. But we also have the challenge of organizing the organized. Just because you're in a union doesn't mean, oftentimes you don't even know you're in a union. This is one of my weird hobbies, is I'll go to see the Phillies, and I know everybody there who serves me my beer is unionized. And I'll ask them, what union are they in? And they often don't even know. They say, I think it has the word food in it. They don't even know. And if people aren't aware of the most basic things, like what union they're in, that's the failure of a particular union. But if people don't identify as with union consciousness, don't really know what it means to be to be a member of a union, don't understand anything about what unions do. If they just view it as something I pay dues for and something I get some benefits, it might as well just be an insurance fund. If people don't understand the role of the labor movement, the fellow before was talking about the role of the labor movement historically. It's like we have historical amnesia. If people don't understand that, then they can't really interpret the world. And if we don't explain how the world works to people, somebody else will. Tucker Carlson will.
Yeah.
Or Trump will, or the Tea Party will, and they'll provide an explanation of why they're struggling that has to do with whatever it may be. You know, the immigrants are taking your jobs, whatever. So unions have a responsibility, and labor councils have a responsibility to do that, to educate people, to help them understand how the world works, to provide an alternative framework, and then to mobilize them. We know right now that on any given election, about 60% of union members vote Democratic and 40% will vote Republican. And there's no real other option at this point, so that's how it goes. But that 40%, there's nothing special about Trump, right? It's been like that since Nixon. And if we're going to really transform, power in this country, that number has to change, right? We have to get 65, 70, 75, 80, voting for the party that hates labor the least, right? Not all Democrats are pro-union, but the party is definitely much more pro-union than the Republican Party. And the labor councils, to me, offer an opportunity to get us from that 60-40 to 70-30, 75-25. And it's really a lost opportunity. And it's not easy. You know better than I do, right? You're trying to run an organization, I'm sure, with inadequate resources, without the people and the capacity you need to really do what you would want to do. But anyway, we need to organize the organized as well. It's a big problem that unions face, and labor councils can help with that.
I agree. Yeah. I really appreciate your time. I've really enjoyed the conversation, Adam. Do you have anything that you wanted to ask him before we let him go?
I just really appreciate it. I have learned a lot as someone who, is active in my labor council, sees this potential that you've described and that Jacob's been describing as well. I think they are so important. I would encourage anyone listening, get involved with your local labor council in whatever way, you can, whatever that looks like. I think we're dealing with, down here in the South, a lot of labor councils are, not up to snuff. They have been withering for years in many cases, lack of engagement, lack of affiliation, all sorts of issues we're dealing with. But, the power and the potential that is there is so important. And something you said, that courage is contagious. I really enjoyed that. And I think that is something that is so true. The more we show up for one another and the more we struggle with one another, the more that builds. And you're right, that we don't necessarily have to have a big check or, a big staff to show up for one another and have each other's back. And I think there is real power and value in that. So I really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you again. I didn't have any other further questions. I just, I do want to give you any opportunity you have here for final words, if you had any closing thoughts with us.
Well, I want to read a quote, but you have to excuse me. I'm going to call it up. It's from something I'm working on right now, because I think it's interesting, and it's from John Commons, who was a labor historian, who also was very instrumental in helping to shape the New Deal. Nobody knows any of this history, which you mentioned me before, and I'm going to send you. I'll send it to. I forget his first name. Jacobs?
Yes,
yeah, Jacob.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Something called Solidarity Bingo that I use when I teach labor history, because I also do labor education. And it's an interesting game that I was thinking of when I was listening to you talk about labor history, and I'll send it to you so you can maybe adapt it. It's a way to get people to learn about labor history in a fun way by playing a bingo game. But the quote I wanted to read which not coming up on my screen here. Just give me 1 second.
Oh yeah, you're fine, and I'm really excited about this solidarity bingo as a former teacher. Yeah, any way we can make labor education fun and engaging with people and get them interested in it. And I think we have to treat adult learners just like, I wouldn't say just like children, but we have to respond to the different needs of adult learners, and people learn in different styles, different ways. So we have to be sensitive to that. There's no like one size fits all, but that's really exciting. So yes, please do send us that.
I'll send it to you, and then you can give the winner, and there usually are not winners because nobody's been taught this history. We have historical amnesia. You can give them a union-made Hershey candy bar. And people don't realize it was an actual sit-down strike at the Hershey factory in Pennsylvania. And that Hershey bar is unionized. It's from unionized workers, but it's an invisible part. Even our candy has a labor history. But I'll send it to you, and I think you'll find it interesting. And here's the quote. The trades union or central body, although it is the second form of organization of labor, is the first to arouse the public. And it repeats itself in all industrial countries. It represents the uprising of a class against other classes, submerging the lines that distinguish occupations. That was John Commons in 1918. And I thought of it before when the issue of class was mentioned, because what the Labor Council does represent is this moment where I'm not just a carpenter and a teacher and a plumber. I'm in this space and we're learning about each other's issues, and we can begin to fashion something beyond union consciousness. And there's nothing wrong with union consciousness. We need more of that. We need more people focusing on better wages, hours of work, and conditions. But the Labor Council offers that opportunity to kind of view things bigger and to think about class, to think about what a class can do in a region, in a state, in a country. And he said that in 1918, he was a little bit concerned, like, oh no, I don't know, these labor councils, maybe things are getting out of control. And he couldn't have been more wrong, right? I mean, labor councils kind of withered on the vine, and we're still trying to reinvigorate them over 100 years later. But I always thought that was an interesting quote, and I wanted to leave you with that. So.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much, and thank you again for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Watch your email. I'll send you the stuff.
All right.
Pleasure talking to you.
All right, folks. Definitely check out the book if you haven't. It has apparently been reprinted. This is, I think this is the 2001 edition, so but apparently you can get a reprint. The book is called Central Labor Councils and the Revival of American Unionism, Organizing for Justice in Our Communities by Immanuel, Ness, and Stuart, Eimer. So check it out if you haven't. Lots of good stuff in the book. We're going to wrap up today by taking a look at Teamsters President Sean O'Brien. You know, I wish that we had it set up where the Zoom guest could hear the clips, because he said something about how people like don't know what a union is, or they think that it's just an insurance thing. And oh boy golly, do I have a clip for you from Sean O'Brien, president of the Teamsters International Union. And I'll do a little bit of throat clearing. Obviously, Sean O'Brien, the leadership of Sean O'Brien and his group at the Teamsters has been good in many ways for the Teamsters Union. They got the ALU to affiliate, and since the ALU's affiliation, organizing at Amazon for the first time has really taken off in a real way nationwide. There have now been multiple of those delivery service providers, the kind of contract companies that Amazon uses. There have been multiple of those to go union in the last month or so, and the ALU has had new elections, and it seems like the new leadership is getting serious about organizing for a contract. And so there are, and they've organized 50,000 workers since Sean O'Brien became president of the Teamsters. Okay, so look, like really, really good stuff, and probably organizing new members, getting new workplaces organized is one of the most important things that you can do as a union. And so even with my political and even, union disagreements with Sean O'Brien aside, I know that John Palmer is running against Sean O'Brien And I mean, I know that John Palmer and I agree much more. We're much more closely aligned, I believe, on politics. But I would have to think really seriously about, like, if I was a Teamster, who I would vote for in the election, because of, you know, that Sean O'Brien's been doing, you know, some good things for the Teamsters. And so all of that throat clearing aside, fortunately, I don't have to really make that decision. That's going to be up to the Teamsters. Sean O'Brien was on Theo Von's podcast recently. Theo Von is kind of in the Joe Rogan, like, dude bro podcast sphere. He for sure kind of like seems and has a culturally conservative affect. He has some, you know, kind of opinions on immigration and other things that I would disagree with. But also he's like a super kind of apolitical affect, right? And so just kind of a dude bro, right? And lots of people have been on his podcast. Bernie Sanders, I think, was Donald Trump on Theo Von's podcast? I can't remember, but he's had a lot of people on his podcast. I really enjoyed Bernie Sanders on Theo Von's podcast. It was pretty cool. And it was kind of like, you know, that thing where you get somebody on Joe Rogan who's a left-winger, and Joe Rogan sounds like a left-winger, and you get a right-winger on Joe Rogan, and then Joe Rogan sounds like a right-winger. It was kind of that deal. Like, Theo Von sounded just straight up like a socialist while he was talking to Bernie Sanders. And then while he's talking to other people, he sounds like kind of a little bit of a fascist. So, you know, but I enjoy listening to Theo Von occasionally when he gets a good guest. But so he had Sean O'Brien on, and he asked Sean O'Brien what a union is. Let's play this first clip.
And a union is what?
A union is, you know, we represent working people.
Okay.
We collectively bargain for our members. We make certain that we protect them in the workplace, process all their grievances, but more importantly, organize workers throughout the country that want to be unionized. And we've been very successful doing that. And we just want to represent working people. We know 1.3 million right now. Hopefully we'll be 2 million in the near future.
Amen.
So, you know, longtime listeners of the show are going to know, like, immediately, I think, what my issue there is. What is a union? Theo Von asks. Sean O'Brien says, we, the union, represent workers, this other third group that is not we, right? We, the union, organize workers, this third different set of people that is not the union. We file grievances for the workers, this other third kind of out there group that's not the union. And that is just fundamentally a misunderstanding or, you know, the wrong idea of unionism. But it was soft enough there. It was a soft enough version of this third partying of the union, which, you know, third partying the union, any organizer training classes, I would be willing to bet a significant amount of money that if you go to a Teamsters organizer training as a Teamster, this is going to be one of the first things that you learn about that the bosses will do is they will say the union is a third party. And here is Sean O'Brien, international president of the Teamsters, saying what the bosses say about unions and about workers, that we're different groups, not the same. But it, you know, look, it was soft enough there that I didn't know if I was going to like make a segment about it. You know, it was, you know, it wasn't super egregious, and he didn't spend a long time kind of like talking about it. So I was kind of going back and forth, and I didn't know if I was going to do it. But then when I finished I listened to the whole, it's like 2 hours. It was a long time. But I listened to it on like 2 times speed, but nevertheless, it was still a long time. And they hit on this topic kind of again. And this second version of this was so much more egregious that I almost felt compelled to talk about it, that I have to talk about it, because millions of people are going to, I think it's millions, let me look it up. A lot of people are going to see this from Sean O'Brien on Theo Von's podcast. I don't know exactly how many it is. I think it's millions. Let's see. Theo Von. Let's look it up on YouTube. It's about 500,000 views on YouTube alone. And so you've obviously also got the audio platform. So it's a lot of people, maybe a million. are going to hear Sean O'Brien, president of the Teamsters, president of one of the largest unions in the country, third partying the union. But the second time he does it is so much more egregious. I felt like I had to talk about it. Let's play this.
And it starts with the individual people, and sometimes the individual people can't do it by themselves anymore because they don't have the lawyers to back them up. They don't have the voice they need. So the individual people have to get together and they have to unionize, and that's where you guys come in.
You can't survive as an American worker not represented now that the deck is stacked against you, and the average person, look, you want to go to work, do your job, let us fight for you. Let us take on the grievances at work. Don't bring them home. That's the beauty of a union. You don't have to. You have the backing of a union. You don't have to fight with your employer. Make a call and say, hey, to your business agent, you work for me. This is my issue. This is my grievance. I have faith you're going to fix it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. You don't have to take on all that stress.
Wow. Let us, the union, fight for you, the worker. Don't bring the stress home. That's the beauty of the union. You can call your business agent and he will resolve the problem for you. I mean, that is just totally the wrong idea of unionism. That is not, that's crazy. That's crazy. You cannot build a powerful fighting union by making people believe that they just sign a card and then they can call their business agent and the business agent will fix all of their problems. The business agent is only as powerful as the members. If the members are not activated, then the business agent does not have that legitimacy and that backing, and the boss is not going to fear him or her, right? I mean, that's just so. I almost don't have anything else to say about it because it's just so crazy to me that this is the selling pitch. This is his elevator pitch for unionism. You don't have to fight. You don't have to fight. That's why you should join a union, so you don't have to fight. That's crazy. I don't know what else. I'm just at a loss for words. I don't know. Adam, what do you think? Help me out here. What's going on?
Well, I think what you said earlier is we are trained to anticipate third-party language from the boss, and we get that all the time from industry, from management, but oftentimes people in our labor movement do the same kind of thing. They third-party the union, and we have to acknowledge that unions are both like institutions that exist, right, with their own leadership and structures and budgets and all that good stuff, but at their core, unions are a tool in our toolbox. It is the tool and the method in which we do fight, in which we as working people are able to fight. It's the tool that gives us the ability to fight back. So yeah, it is a little strange. It's a little strange. I don't like telling members, call us, we'll handle it for you. I worked for an organization for years where they had that sort of philosophy, and most members treated it like insurance. It was something you paid for. You paid a bill for it every month, and you called if there was an emergency. And if there was an emergency, you call and you expect them to just kind of handle it for you. That's not the same as being part of a working class movement that is organizing and building power, both in the workplace and in the broader community. So, I do think that it's not helpful to have that kind of framing. I think we have to be honest with folks that you do have to fight. Like, that's how we will win. People have to be engaged. People have to stand up and do something. Now, that's not to say that you're going to fight alone. That is the point with the union, you're not fighting alone. You're fighting as part of a movement and part of a collective. And I think that's the lesson that I really want folks to take away. It's about that power that we have when we come together. So it's not an insurance. It's not an insurance plan. Yes, those sorts of protections, like, you know, when you have an emergency and you have to call your union to file a grievance, or because you're being terminated, or, you know, you need a lawyer, or whatever the situation may be, like, obviously that's a very important part of what unions do. And it's an important part of why you pay dues. And when those situations happen, you damn well hope that the union comes through for you, right? But ideally, it's a situation where you aren't really separated from the union. And it's not like an outside entity that you're calling. Like, you see yourself as part of that organization. You are part of the organization. And so, yeah, it's a frustrating thing, and it's something we have to deal with. And it does harken back to the comments from our guest earlier about organizing the organized, because I do think he hit on something, which is a lot of people who are in unions already do not have some sort of really militant class consciousness, so to speak. They may not even have like the trade union consciousness in their workplace, frankly. And so that's something that we have to work on. We do have to educate our members to know what it means to be in a union, both, you know, the responsibility and also, you know, the role that each person plays in that, because it takes everyone working together to make it effective and to make it strong. I think there are real limits to what you can accomplish if you treat yourself like an insurance agency.
Right.
Because ultimately, the power dynamics are not in our favor. We don't own the companies, nor do we own the politicians. So, you know, the dynamics are not in our favor. So he is right that the deck is stacked against the workers. I agree with that, but yeah, I don't agree with the framing as if it is someone else that you call to handle your problems. No, we have to work together to fix them together.
Yes, and we had somebody in the chat say, I think you may be reading more into that, say most unions I've dealt with, including the IA, this is an IATSE member, unions around here want the members to lean on the business rep so that there won't be retaliations. And look, there are reasons to start with the business representative, but it's the problem that we have is not that the first time there's an issue, you call the business agent and you want to file a grievance. The problem is the idea that the union as an institution is separate from you and it fights for you, right? And fortunately, I do think, like I said, and you know, kind of calling back to what I was saying before, it does not seem like this new organizing, or at least some of it, you know, like at Amazon in particular, it does not seem like this new organizing is reflective of this attitude, because at multiple of these Amazon delivery contractors, we're seeing marches on the boss. We're seeing the people that are being organized fighting together. And that's the beauty of the union, is that you have to fight, but you do not have to fight alone. You fight together. That's the beauty of the union. And you're fighting together when you're in a unionized environment with a contract. It might be funneled through your business agent filing a grievance or something, but ultimately it comes back to your willingness to fight together and your ability to fight together. And that's the issue, is kind of like, and I guess, and I understand how it could come across as perhaps a like a nitpicky thing, but it's really important for people ideologically, I think, to believe that they are the union, and when the business agent fights for them, that is the union fighting for them. That is them fighting for themselves, right? I think that's a really important distinction, that it is harmful to have somebody like a Sean O'Brien muddying the waters on this idea of, you know, the difference or lack thereof of the idea that the union and the workers are two separate parties. I think there's some damage there that's being done when the union is also part of the ones that are third partying the union. Hypertech says the whole point of unions is to fight, but we work together. Exactly right.
Well, and I was going to also say that unions do muddy the waters on this subject sometimes when it comes to class as well. You know, how frequently we see unions talk about fighting for the middle class, you know, protecting the middle class, you know, winning back the middle class, all this and that. I mean, by definition, union members are working class, right? We are not in the middle class, right? We are not small business owners. We're not lawyers and doctors who run our own firms. We're not stock investors. We don't have capital. We work for people with capital, and we are working class. And so I get very frustrated when our unions engage in that sort of mystification. Yes, unions have historically afforded many of its members middle-class style lifestyles, like middle-class lifestyles, middle-class income, perhaps. But definitionally, we're working class. You know, don't get that twisted. And I don't think that's helpful, especially in America where, you know, 80% of the country seems to think they're middle class. Right. And that just doesn't add up. So, you know, that's something that I notice a lot that bothers me. It's semi-related there.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that Theo Von, on his clips, the title of each of the clips with Sean O'Brien begins with Teamsters Boss. Teamsters Boss, explain why the longshoremen are on strike.
Well, that's
Teamsters
another
Boss.
one. That's another one.
But does Sean O'Brien care about that? Like, does he like being called the Teamster? You know, like, I don't know. It's just frustrating to me. And then also, you know, as another quick aside, I cannot stand that shirt that he's going around wearing. Teamsters versus everybody. That is so bad ideologically. That is the kind of idea that you are pushing into your members, that it's our union versus everybody, rather than the working class versus the bosses, rather than the unions versus the bosses. It's the Teamsters versus everybody. That
does bother me.
That, like, really grinds my gears. And yeah,
I don't think that's helpful. Like, it's, you know, it's fine if it's like a football team, right? That's cool, whatever. But
right,
yeah,
it's not a football team.
It's not a football team,
No.
right? So, like, you know, I don't know. I'm thinking as a labor council, we want to get the Teamsters engaged, but are y'all versus us too? Like, no, you know, just think through it. It doesn't make sense, and I don't particularly care for it either. So, just little things like that. I think, you know, maybe it's nitpicky, maybe it's reading too much into framing, but, you know, that stuff does make an impact on folks, whether we realize it or not. It may not be, you know, very conscious, but I think it can make an impact.
Hypertext asks, and this is a good opportunity to talk about this topic. I mean, wasn't the middle class basically formed because of unions? And if we didn't have them, we wouldn't have had a middle class at all. And, you know, like, there's a way in which that is true, right? There is a way in which that makes true, that makes sense, that if you conceptualize the middle class as a lifestyle and a level of income and a level of consumption and all of that, then yes, you can say that. But I would argue that the middle class was more of a liberal invention to separate tiers of workers from one another, to make us that either was done purposely or had the effect of you know, making higher paid workers think of themselves as in a different class than lower paid workers, and makes solidarity kind of that much more difficult. And that analytically, I come from a school of thought that says that class is your relationship to the means of production. And so if you work for a wage and you are not a manager, then you are working class, at least in that aspects of your life. And there are lots of complications, and you can be working class and then rent out a second home. And in your position as a worker at your job, you are working class, but in your position as a landlord, you're kind of petit bourgeois, right? But I think that those are the important distinctions, and that middle class is kind of a made up mumbo jumbo, meaningless kind of thing. But I don't know. Adam is a lot more smarter than me on that. So
no,
I can say it better than I can.
I agree. I think many people conceive of middle class in the way you described it, as a level of consumption and lifestyle and income and culture even, perhaps. And that's strongly correlated with education. But, a machinist who makes $100,000 is still working class, even if they might actually make more than like the small business owner down the road. But the small business owner down the road, who, let's say hypothetically, also makes $100,000 a year, makes their money via profits, right? And employing others. And so there is a difference. So yeah, to me, it's your relationship to the means of production. It's your relationship to labor and to capital. How do you make money? And do you have enough money that your money makes its own money?
Right.
That is a clear distinction. But I do think there is an American mythos around this middle class, and people have this concept of being able to, buy a house with a white picket fence and 2 cars and a dog, and, kind of have that lifestyle, maybe the occasional vacation or that sort of thing. And I would agree with the assessment that unions did provide a middle-class lifestyle for millions of workers for a very long time, and continue to do so, but obviously historically much more so. If you look from the 1930s through the 1960s into the early 70s, wages and productivity tracked pretty closely, right? As workers became more productive and the economy grew, workers took a pretty good share of that income thanks to unions. Rich people were still rich. They continued to get rich, but inequality in terms of income and wealth was much lower during this time, from the 30s through the 60s, thanks to the union movement. But what we've seen in the last 50 years is the skyrocketing of inequality of wealth and income, because more and more of those gains have been concentrated into a tiny number of hands at the top, right? So the 1%, or even the 1% of the 1%, have seen their wealth and income grow tremendously over the past 50 years, whereas working people's wages have been more or less stagnant, on the big trajectory here. And that is directly correlated to the decline in union power. We have had less power to retain the value of the labor, retain the value that our labor produces. Unions help us do that. So that's some of the thoughts I have on this. I think, if you want to get technical, I would say middle class folks are typically like small business owners, people in management, people who may still actually have to work, but also rely on other people's work, and can direct other people's work. But yeah, most of us are working class. The vast majority of us, we don't give orders. We have to follow orders, and we don't own much. We just work for the people who do. And so I think those class distinctions are important. We have to understand those. And I don't like it when labor unions are not clear about that and contribute to this sort of mystification. It doesn't help our cause if people are more confused about this situation. People need to know where they stand in society. That's important, because that helps us understand who we are, who we have common bonds with, and who our common enemies really are. And it's not, the folks who are poorer than us, because that's the other thing in class conversations in America, is that working people are also often pit against the most, desperate and the poorest and marginalized folks in the community, right? So they want low and middle income workers to be pit against folks who are on welfare and disability and things like that, and of course immigrants. And it's just total nonsense. We as working class folks, if you don't own a bunch of capital, then you have more in common with each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key lesson.
There you go. That's going to wrap it up for us this week, folks. Thanks for tuning in. TVLR.fm is where you can find us as well on Facebook, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Adam mentioned earlier something about a TikTok, but our TikTok has been banned. I don't know why, so we're going to have to make a new one. But
find us everywhere else.
Find us everywhere else.
Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter.
Yeah.
Last Week in Southern Labor and Boss Watch come out as newsletters, so you can subscribe to that. Don't forget to go to labornotes.org/events. You can sign up for the Troublemaker School. You can sign up for some of their online trainings. Really appreciate everyone tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back next week with some great stuff. We will not be live on Saturday because of the Troublemaker School.
Yep.
But we've got some really cool guests that we've booked. So I'm excited about next week. It's going to be great.
Yeah, going to be a good time. See y'all there, and see you next week.